Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Wandering Naruto Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Stone is silent. It does not weep or wail. It does not betray or lie. It does not grow up to suffer. Death is kinder than life in that regard. I used to think otherwise. Before the dark times, before the betrayal, life's all about choices. I chose to save everyone in front of me without reservations. I was a fool. Some people can't be saved. When your very world turns on you, sacrifices you, casts you out ... it changes your perspective. It certainly changed mine. A dagger in the back and a sword through the heart. And for what? I gave them everything, and they gave me death. I tried so strong, got so far, and in the end, it doesn't even matter. They chose their precious Uchiha over me, forsook peace for the sake of a madman's revolution. What's the saying these days? Kill the boy, let the man be born. Congratulations. They certainly killed me. I dream of my old world sometimes. They aren't pleasant dreams. This world is my home now. Don't know how I survived, or how I landed in Remnant. Doesn't matter, I suppose. I'm here now, not there. There's no going back. I was bleeding out in a ditch when the old man found me. He nursed me back to health. He listened to my tale. He understood. He gave me a home. He gave me purpose again. Direction, when I was rudderless. I owe him for that. And he's right. Sometimes you have to make the difficult decisions. Sometimes you need to keep secrets. Sometimes you need to harden your heart. Sometimes a man has to make strong choices, choices that might look wrong to others. Now there's work to be done. Has to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. I say again, stone is an appealing thing indeed. It does not weep or wail. Stone is cold. It does not betray or lie. Stone is silent. It does not laugh nor smile. Stone cannot be broken. It does not touch or sing. Stone wants for nothing, expects nothing, and so cannot be taken by surprise. It does not love. Stone sheds no tears. It cannot be deceived, cannot be betrayed, cannot be abandoned. Better to be alone, then. Better to throw oneself into one's task and forget it all. Better to enjoy the silence. Best to have a heart of stone. The grimm came at dusk. As far as ambushes went, theirs was almost appealing in its simplicity, downright clever even. Rather than charge headlong into the settlement like the rest of their fellows, they adopted a silent approach. Unwilling to risk being seen by the guards, this particular pack struck when the hour was late. They moved under cover of darkness when the lunar light lay at its lowest. When the fractured moon was concealed by clouds. When all fires had been reduced to mere cinders. When any sane individual would have been fast asleep in their homes, tucked away under warm furs from the cold veil winter. Many outlying villages had fallen to such ambushes in the past. Many more yet would. As one mind, one unit, the Beowulf pack crept into the sleepy village without fear. They prowled through the market square, climbed over hedges, scrambled around fallen statues. Theirs was a large warband, numbering well over 3 dozen, more than a match for any fledgling hunter team. Their leader even more so. For this pack was led by an alpha, a great brute of a beast, with as many moons to its name as there were stars in the sky. It was old, ancient. It had survived many a skirmish with many a huntsman and grown all the stronger for it. Now the towering beast paused and took stock of its surroundings. Behind, its brothers halted. A mighty snout rose and inhaled deeply. Something was amiss. Perhaps, had its fellows possessed more than the meanest intelligence, they would have come to the same conclusion as their leader. All humans were noisy creatures, fitful beings that stank of fear, fear which in turn fed them. When one of their kind was seen, the fleshy ones would kick up a fuss, shout and scream and scramble for their weapons. And yet now, there was only silence. None challenged them. No cries went up. No alarm was sounded. There was no fear to be felt here. No prey to be found here. The village lay empty. No, not quite empty. It could smell the scent of flesh within, but it was distant. Muted. Stranger still, the ground was loose at their feet, as if someone had recently dug several holes and filled them back in. But why? To what purpose? Clever though the alpha was, he could not comprehend the purpose of an anomaly such as this, and thus, it led the pack onward in search of their target. It lacked the ability to worry as the fleshy ones did, but it experienced a pang of confusion all the same as the silence persisted. Where had all the humans gone? Where was their prey? ... Why did it have a bad feeling about this? For 3 nights now they had harried this little hamlet without fail, striking in the gloom as commanded by their queen. Such was her decree. Their target was here. She must be here. The girl. She who must be found. She who must not be killed. She who must be captured. They knew her face now, and they would not rest until she was found. Tonight, they would tear the village down around her head and force her out of hiding once and for all. They were the hunters, and she was their prey, as all humans were. As it had always been. But tonight something hunted them. A hooded head rose from a nearby alleyway, framed by the shadows of a muddy green cloak. Baleful blue eyes burned in the dark as they beheld the grimm. Whiskered cheeks dimpled in the faintest of scowls. Shrouded in silence and unseen by the grimm, the hooded being pulled a tiny orange pistol from their sleeve. Barely a weapon at all, this. It held but a single round. The grimm never heard its owner whisper. On my mark. An arm rose, pointing it towards the silent sky. Take aim. A series of soft clicks answered him. Fire. With an almighty roar, 9 flares howled into the sky, bathing the night in bloody crimson relief. Every single grimm jolted at the sudden light, looked up, and was subsequently blinded for their foolishness. It would prove their undoing. A chorus of furious cracks raced hot on the heels of the flares as dust-powered rifles unloaded upon the unwary pack below. Smoke swelled from the shots, blinding the beasts yet further. Most of them were still reeling when someone detonated the mines underfoot. The dull roar that followed drowned out any howl the wolves might have made. Half the pack perished instantly, blasted apart or incinerated on the spot. The rest reeled, clutching their wounds. These monsters had thought to drown these poor people with numbers. They were drowned with clones instead. 100 men burst from ground, leaped from the trees, appeared from the very air itself. Each wore the same face. Each brandished a weapon in hand. In short order, the ambushers were themselves ambushed and put to the sword. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. Somehow, the Alpha was lucky enough to survive the initial blast. In that, it was fortunate. Instincts and heavy bone plating had shielded it from the worst of the explosives. Eyes spinning, ears ringing, world reeling, it struggled upright in the smoke. It found the one responsible for the slaughter soon thereafter, a cloaked huntsman wading into the melee. He pulled a two-handed war axe from the holster at his back. It was a simple weapon, small yet slender, the kind one might expect a woodsman to use. All polished timber and steel with two edges, each glittering with ice dust. The huntsman flung it forward and the hatchet buried itself in a wolf's skull. His prey crumpled with gurgle. With a yowl born of loss and rage, Alpha Beowulf lunged at him while he was unarmed. Bone claws tore the cowl from the hunter's face as he ducked away. A youthful visage was exposed, whiskered cheeks framed by shaggy blonde hair and dull blue eyes. In a rare moment of clarity, the grimm suffered an epiphany. This was the gaze of a dead man, a being stripped of morals and compassion. A wraith, going through his same motions day after day. A man with a heart of stone. Keep moving. Keep killing. It was all he knew. All he could do. He would rip and tear, until it was done. No witty retort was given. No clever remark made. The Alpha bit down at him in a frothing fury. Gleaming golden hands caught the monstrosity by its jaws and wrenched them apart with a hideous crack. Wider, no. Wider still. Widest. The beast's roar trailed off into a confused whine when it failed to find the flesh it sought. That whine became a whimper as the man began to bend its slavering maw back. Bone crackled. Hideous red eyes bulged in confusion. Claws thrashed against his cloak and ripped into his body. They skittered off a burnished silver breastplate of light steel and armored shoulder, leaving them untouched. Man met monster. The latter yielded. An awful pop filled the air and the Alpha knew no more. With a long-suffering sigh, the huntsman dropped its severed head on the ground and left it to dissolve with the brute's body. He yanked back with his right arm and the axe flew into his waiting hand. It smacked against his palm as he spun to face another grimm, only to find naught but decaying corpses in their wake. He wasn't sure why that disappointed him. The deed was done, the village protected, the people safe to return. By rights he should be pleased. Instead he just felt hollow. His army awaited, a sea of familiar faces his face, staring silently back at him. They were his legion, awaiting their commands. He gave them gladly. All right, lads, let's get this over with. We've got a busy night ahead of us and a long walk back. A gloved hand flicked out his scroll and called forth an image, holding it up for the horde to see. She's a tricky little thing, and probably scared out of her wits. Don't hurt her. His gaze narrowed when a few of them looked surly. She's just a kid. We're here to rescue her. Anyone who forgets that gets dispelled. As when they saluted and dove into the village. In the end, it only took 5 minutes to find the individual Ospen sent him for, if only because she hadn't fled with the rest. Unwise that, but he wasn't the sort to look a gift horse in the mouth. Perhaps she didn't trust any of the villagers with her safety. Wise, that. The wilds of Vale were a dangerous place. In truth, he hadn't come here to save this little hamlet or the people dwelling within. They'd simply been in the way. It had only taken a few harsh words to make them evacuate. Almost sad, really. If it were his home he would have stood his ground. These people hadn't, for the most part. One of the clones believed their quarry was hiding in an abandoned homestead, a battered ruin torn apart by grimm some nights past. They'd all but shorn the roof off and hacked into the walls to get at those within, leaving the ramshackle building open to the elements. The door itself had long since been sundered by heavy blows, and now barely hung from rusty hinges that creaked in the wind. The huntsman beheld a spot of dry BLD upon the worn green frame and sighed. Pushing the torn frame aside, he entered the ransacked home. The interior proved worse in every way. Upturned furniture greeted his gaze, accompanied by a set of shattered stairs and yet more bloodstains. BLD on the floor told a grisly tale all its own. Someone had held a bitter last stand down here with a pitchfork and a fire poker. Judging by the bloodstains and the shattered state of said implements, it hadn't ended well for them. He found a worn photograph nearby, its frame worn and cracked. A family, then. A mother, a father, and 2 children. Diamond shame, he muttered. Hope some of them made it out. Little more than a shell of its former self, the cottage would no doubt torn down when the survivors returned to rebuild their lives. Those who had died perished would be buried, as would the memory of what transpired on this awful night. They would soon be forsaken and forgotten, like all the rest. Nothing more, nothing less. Just like him, steeling himself against an unpleasant memory, the huntsman stretched out his senses. Someone was here. He just knew it. But where? His gaze flitted to a heavy oaken chest and scratch marks against the floor. Someone had dragged it here. hastily, by the look of things. The grimm hadn't bothered with it. He gave it a good strong kick, and to his surprise, received a response. A dull thump echoed in the dark and the chest lurched as though struck from below. Blue eyes zeroed in on it. In short order the large chest was pushed away and a cellar door revealed. He broke the lock, found the latch, and pulled it back, revealing a ladder and a yawning space below. Anyone down there? Something burst out of the dark and surged up the ladder to slam into his chest. He tried to catch them, and received an angry bite to the wrist for his troubles. Rather than risk their safety he let go and allowed them to scramble past. He barely even felt the impact. A lesser man might have panicked. The huntsman turned with the blow and followed its source with one eye, tracking it all the while. Easy there. You're all right now. The shinobi turned mercenary turned towards the shivering wreck. The grimm are all gone. I killed every last one of them. With deliberate slowness he reached into one of his belt pouches and withdrew a half-eaten granola bar. He brandished it before him like a sword. Come on. He held it up at eye level, voice echoing in the stillness. You must be hungry after being down there for so long. The silence had no answers for him, but he saw a shadow scramble into a darkened corner. Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a scowl as he knelt. And Naruto, by the way. He spoke slowly, modulating his voice into a soothing undertone. What's your name? Look, if I was going to kill you, I would have done it by now. He shook his head and lowered his hand. I'm here to protect you. Scout's honor. A faint scratching sound reached his ears. Slowly, tentatively, a tiny shape emerged in the light of the moon. See, that wasn't so bad. Naruto looked down at the child. Back to the photograph on his scroll. Back to her again. The little girl gazed up at him, eyes wide and fearful. Mismatching orbs of pale cream regarded him, framed by a messy mop of brown and pink spattered with BLD. In the moonlight, her eyes burned with wild flames. Clad in tattered brown rags, she was stick-thin and looked to be on her last legs, barely clinging to the last dregs of life. Curiosity gave way to intrigue as he looked upon her. This was the girl he'd been asked to find. A wet kitten was more dangerous than this little tyke, burning eyes or no. Still, he didn't approach her, because looks could be deceiving. And right now, she was eyeing the ration bar in his hands like it were solid gold. He granted her a grim grin. Hello, little maiden. Nice to meet you. She didn't even blink. Her eyes were fixed firmly on the granola bar. Dirty fingers twitched restlessly at her sides. For a moment he thought she'd try to take it from him by force. The air shimmered and rippled as she tried to weave an illusion between the two of them. He saw right through it. Her eyes burned again, odd flames shooting from her gaze. Naruto tensed, but she didn't call upon the power. The child just stared at him. Perhaps she realized what he was, perhaps she knew better. Perhaps she simply had a good head on her shoulders. Who could say? Naruto hefted the granola bar. Her gaze followed it. You want this? Her eyes flicked to his face, then the food in his hand. Pale lips worked wordlessly, a dry tongue flitting out across cracked lips. No sound emerged, not even a squeak. Odd, even children could make noise. That she hadn't done so concerned him. Some folk were born deaf, others came into this world blind. But to be born mute, he'd not seen that before. Poor thing, he frowned down at her. Can't talk, can ya? The girl's head bobbed in a fitful nod. Go any family. She shook her head. Then what do I call you? She reached out at him, at the food in his hand, but didn't approach. Her eyes met his, conveying an unspoken message. Gimme. The bitter gasp of a starved child. Please. So hungry. Something stirred in his hardened heart. He knelt further. The girl skittered back when he reached out for her. Here. A lazy toss of his wrist sent the ration bar sailing through the air. Her eyes snapped to it with hawk-like focus, watching it sail end over end. Fear burned away in the face of hunger. She scrambled forward and snatched it up before it could touch the ground. Foil crumpled in her hands and the food vanished into her mouth. By the sage, he didn't even see her chew. She'd practically inhaled the diamond thing. He produced another and she all but devoured that. His eyes flickered to her hair and wild eyes. Pink, brown, white, an idea was born. Hey, the little girl perked up and scowled at him like a wary fox. In return, Naruto pulled the canteen from his belt and offered it to her. She crept closer. He didn't move. Tiny fingers darted out, ripped it from his grasp and tore the cap off. She drank greedily. Nothing was spared. The empty canister struck the dusty ground with a dull clatter. Her eyes sought his again, and he found himself reminded of a stray dog that had been kicked one too many times. She was wary of him. Rightfully so. A man in armor was a man to be feared, and he was more dangerous than most. Still, he couldn't leave her here. Neo. The girl jolted as if she'd been struck and a pale finger touched her chin, as if to say, me. Neo. Naruto repeated the word slowly, sounding it out for her as she gazed at him with eyes of mismatching cream. That'll be your name. It's short for Neapolitan. Matches your hair. Why do you think? When she dithered he had but to wave a third rations bar before her face. Her approval was won almost instantly and her head bobbed in silent agreement. Naruto cracked a smile. Like that one, do you? Neo offered him a small, anxious smile as she chewed slower this time. Upon her strung one meal. Poor tyke. She couldn't be more than 7 years old. Not even 10, and already she was being hunted by the forces of darkness. Perhaps that was why Ospen wanted her so badly. To be a maiden at such a tender young age. Well, he didn't much envy her fate. Maybe she was unlucky. Maybe the power had probably gone to her by chance. Maybe it was destiny. Naruto didn't much know or care for that matter. He'd already made his decision. She couldn't be left her alone. She'd not make it through the next week. A gloved palm descended, fingers splayed toward the ruined ceiling. Come with me if you want to live. That drew a blink from little Neo. She was small, after all, tiny, skittish. She didn't even come up to his waist. A life of malnutrition spent on the run had left her weak indeed. He suspected that if he were to carry her, she wouldn't weigh a thing. The thought burned him. No child should live like this. She deserved a home, a family, even if he couldn't be the one to give her that. Surely Ospen would be able to keep her safe, find a place for her at the very least. A tiny hand wrapped around his thumb and index finger, squeezing tightly. Another wrapped around his right leg. Naruto looked down, somewhat startled to find the little hellion pressing her face into his leg just above the knee. A strange dampness seeped through the fabric of his jeans. Neo raised her gaze. Mismatching eyes met his, framed by tears. Oh dear, his sixth sense bristled. Oddly enough, he had an inkling of what was about to happen. He prayed his was wrong. No, surely she wouldn't. Sure enough, her lips moved, mouthing a word. And with it, his fate was sealed. Papa, he's found her, then. Ospen didn't deign to look up from his desk as the elevator swished open. There was no need. His guests had already made themselves known. James Ironwood all but burst through the half-open doors, a wide smile on his normally stern face. Ospen couldn't help but mirror his ally's enthusiasm. And why not? The general had every reason to be pleased. Today was a grand day, for a call came through early this morning, and a bullhead had been dispatched hours ago to retrieve them. I have been informed that the fall maiden is secure. Yes. Finally, a victory. James slammed a clenched fist down on his desk. A real victory. Victory. A silver brow arched in mild bemusement. We've had many of those in the last year, old friend. Yes, I know that the general scoffed. I'm well aware, but this matters. With her recovered, Ospen held up a hand to forestall an argument. The relic of choice will be secure. I know you needn't remind me, James. It was an unfortunate truth. While the maidens were valuable in their own right, the relics were more precious still. Now there was a thought. Naruto had tracked down one maiden. Perhaps he could be convinced to find the other three. They'd been scattered by the great disaster. By all accounts, this one was just a child. He had a wild, fleeting image of the blonde herding four tykes with glowing eyes and thought better of it. Amusing as that might be, it was unlikely. Besides, what were the chances that the remaining maidens would be children? She's just a child. He'd made many mistakes, but befriending that boy had not been one of them. Naruto was certainly no subordinate of his, more a partner than anything else. 10 years they had worked together, 10 years they pooled their resources. 10 glorious years. A shining decade that had proven rather unpleasant for Salem. Most unpleasant indeed. Naruto could not be tempted with coin. He could not be seduced by the pleasures of the flesh, for his heart was strong as stone. He was ever wary and horribly difficult to kill. Power and prestige meant nothing to one such as him. For one such as he, there was only duty. Relentless, tireless duty. His bonds were few, he spoke to fewer still, and his principles were rooted in stone. In that, they were alike. But in defeat, Salem was spiteful. When it became clear that she was losing ground, she struck at the cities and slew many. In the chaos, the maidens to the winds. They'd been picking up the pieces ever since. Who knew where the next might be found? The remaining maiden could be a bunch of old crones or young girls for all they knew. But James was looking at him now, and he must give him the attention he deserved. I was wondering if could make use of this friend of yours. He'd suspected as much. He seems to have a nose for hunting down maidens. Ospen grimaced into one palm. That would be unwise. He doesn't take orders from me. Merely suggestions. Does it matter? He cannot die. If he's so determined to help, then why not make use of him? And he did not regret entrusting him with that secret for a moment. Salem could not be slain. That much was true. James had balked at that knowledge once. But she could be held back. Take away her pawns, her minions, and her pieces, and she would be forced to start anew. Without them, what did she have? An army of grimm. They had the walking equivalent of a hydrogen bomb. So long as they remained vigilant, she would not find them caught unawares. They had a chance now, and he would not see him thrown to the wolves. Incorrect, James. Unlike me, he's quite mortal. He simply doesn't age as the rest of us do. I still don't rightly know where he came from. Ospen steepled his fingers, considering the map beneath him for a long, agonizing moment. I don't know who or what made him the way he is now. But I know this. He's a good man. A simple soul. Do you see this? A finger stabbed down, indicating the vast swath of green across said map. This young man has single-handedly pushed back the grimm and made colonization possible here in Vale. Mountain Glen would have fallen long ago were it not for his deeds. She fears him. He could do the same for Atlas. But at what cost? No, we must act prudently in this. A weighty silence forced itself between the two allies, no longer young men. In a way, he reminds me of myself. Ospen sighed into it. If I thought he could kill Salem, I'd gladly set him upon her. His old friend granted him a curious look. But you don't think he can? Even him, Salem cannot be killed. Not by him ... not yet at least. Ironwood blinked. Not yet. Naruto is ... very creative when it comes to high ordnance explosive and seals. He shook his head, caught in the teeth of an old memory. A fond memory. No doubt Salem was still rebuilding her tower after the blonde's last incursion. Still, I fear his actions will provoke her all the same. Salem may avoid him ... but she has no shortage of pawns to serve her. He steepled his fingers and laid his chin atop them. Now that she has been found, the girl must be protected. Quickly, before she strikes at her. James, bless him, was quick to see the sense of his scheme. I can have an airship prepped and ready to meet them within the hour. Quite unnecessary. Ospen granted him a grim grin. I've already sent an agent of my own. His face dimpled in a smile. Summer, then. She'll be happy to see him. The two men exchanged a knowing smile. Ospen laughed. You have no idea. Neo, she had a name now. It was hers and it made her happy and she would keep it forever and ever and ever. The girl sounded it out in her head as she followed her protector through the wilds of Vale, rolling it around on her still tongue until she was satisfied. It felt good to have a name. With a name came identity. No longer was she some nameless urchin grubbing about in the dark, forgotten by her parents, forsaken by the world. This was good. This was better. Better still, to finally stop running. She'd been running for nearly a year now, ever since her eyes began to glow and the strange power had come to her. A stranger with a creepy laugh had tried to take her once, but she'd used her illusions and given him the slip. She'd avoided the big brute with the soft voice and big muscles, steered clear of the mustachioed man and his low, lilting voice. But most of all, she'd learned to avoid the hooded woman, with dark skin and her cloak of green. They were looking for her, determined to find her, catch her, and do ... Well, the girl didn't know what they wanted with her, but she hadn't stuck around to find out. Vale became too hot for her and so she fled into the wilds, seeking shelter. She hadn't found it. Grimm hounded her in place of people, chasing her from one settlement to the next. The people in the last village had been rather nice, at least. A small family had taken her in, fed her, and nursed her back to health. They'd even tried to defend her when the Grimm came. They perished for it. But the old man had been smart. He'd hidden her down in the cellar before he fell. He had hidden the trapdoor well, so well that the stupid Grimm weren't able to find it. He'd paid dearly for his cleverness. Sometimes, she heard his screams in her dreams and likely would for the rest of her days. No, Neo slapped her cheeks until they stung. No more bad thoughts. Now she was safe. With night long since past and a good sleep behind her, she felt brave enough to face the afternoon. The open road sprawled out ahead of them with great wooded forests rising up on either side, bringing with it the faint chirps of birds and other wildlife. Further along in the distance she spied the faint smudge of gray on the horizon. That, she had been told, was Vale. Beyond that would be beacon promising security and safety alike. She would stay there for quite some time, until she learned to MSDR her gifts. All because of him. She stole a glance up at her ally. Savior, Papa, bring her a food. Just this afternoon, he'd caught and cooked brace of rabbits for her. She devoured them greedily, then drank from his canteen again after her refilled at a nearby stream. It felt good. For once in her life she wasn't thirsty or hungry. She'd filched new clothes for herself from what the villagers had left behind and was quite chuffed with them. Gone were her ruined and bloody rags left behind to lead any who might hunt her astray, and in their place she wore something altogether more comfortable. Clad in a fluffy dark hoodie with a delightfully pink shirt beneath and matching sweats besides, she was snug as a bug in a rug against the chill of winter. She'd find herself a better outfit, one with style, later down the line. For now, this was nice. Real nice. Naruto caught her staring at him and quirked a blonde brow. Hang it in there. Her head bobbed as she limped along. Blast it. Her legs hurt. Of course, he saw that, too. Want me to carry you? Now there was a sound idea. Neo rounded on him with a brilliant smile, all her pain forgotten, eyes ablaze and bleeding flames of pink cream. Her arms shot up and she hopped in place like a baby bunny. After all she'd suffered through, she bloody well deserved to be carried. Up, now, ... such a demanding little girl. She thought she saw the ghost of a smile touch his whiskered cheeks as he knelt and plucked the axe off his back to make room for her. In short order Neo clambered onto his shoulders like a mad monkey, locked her legs around his sides, and threw her arms around his neck. Her chin took up residence on his collarbone to secure herself further. A chuckle shook his chest when she nuzzled closer. His smile grew an inch. You're not gonna let go, are you? She shook her head fervently and buried her glowing eyes against his neck. They walked in companionable silence for some time after that, taking their time as the hours whittled away. She knew full well her guardian could run like the wind. That he had chosen to move at a more sedate pace suggested he wasn't in any hurry to return to civilization himself. Fine by her. Mismatching eyes flashed balefully at the thought. She longed to tell him about those hunting her, but she lacked the means to do so. She didn't even know her letters, let alone how to write. Speaking was clearly out of the question. Still, she must find a way. Papa needed to know. They heard the bullhead before she saw it coming. It began as a long whine in the distance, one that brought Naruto up short. Like a distant thunderclap slowly growing closer, it soon became impossible to ignore. "Nah," Neo tapped Naruto's shoulder. "SHH." He pressed a finger to her lips and stood his ground. Soon enough a dark speck became visible against the waning light of day. Within moment it grew large. Larger. Largest. Neo began to fidget, fearing the worst. Naruto said not a word, but she heard the faint creak of soft LTHR as his gloved hand tightened around the haft of his axe. "Don't worry." Her chaperone laughed, nodded, sounding mildly amused. This is the way. The way. Neo narrowed her eyes in mild confusion. If the way meant more food, clean clothes, and a comfortable bed, then she'd follow it to the very ends of the earth. But if an enemy came tearing out of that ship and tried to kill her, she was bolting for the tree line. With a great whoosh of air, the mighty metal bird swept in and alighted in the clearing before them with peerless grace. Its pilot must be skilled indeed. A hooded figure pushed the bay doors apart and emerged with a jaunty wave. Panic flared to life in Neo's chest like a miniature sun, burning everything away with dread. No, no, she willed herself to breathe. This cloak was red and white, not green. She didn't have a staff. The huntress tugged her cowl up, revealing a pale face framed by red-black hair, a warm smile, and startling silver eyes. Silver, such an odd and mysterious color. Strangely enough, it set Neo at ease. This was not a bad woman, but a good person indeed. Hello. The newcomer chirruped cheerily at them as she disembarked. I'm here to pick you up. Neo still frowned at the young woman, for it was most certainly a woman, and she was disembarking even now. Of the pilots she saw nothing. They seemed content to remain in the cockpit and stay far, far away from this silly grinning. Proper sense, that. Papa seemed to agree too, because he grunted at her. Summer, I didn't ask for an evac. No, you didn't. The huntress hopped down, white cloak fluttering in the wind behind her. Oz figured you might want one after walking in the wilderness. A beat of silence. Blue eyes narrowed in realization. He traced my scroll call, didn't he? Yup. The girl smacked her lips. Of course he did. Then she saw Neo and all pretense fell away. Oh my gods, is that her? One moment she was a good arm's length away, in the next she was before them, a trail of white rose petals in her wake. She's so tiny. Neo jerked backwards, terribly startled by the smiling visage move before her. So precious, so cute. I want to pinch her cheeks. Neo bared her teeth in a soundless hiss and reared away. Naruto clicked his tongue. Summer, no. Summer, yes, oh. 2 fingers flicked her forehead, drawing a yelp from the exuberant huntress. She glowered at him for it. What was that for? She's had a bad time. The huntsman chastised her. And you're being loud. Startled silver eyes flitted back to Neo with renewed interest. Not pity, she had a feeling this little waif wouldn't take kindly to that. But a different sentiment altogether. Understanding. Empathy, even. Summer dared a quick step forward, only just now noticing how painfully thin and gaunt the poor girl looked. Poor thing. She touched a hand to one of the field pouches on her waist and withdrew a chocolate bar from within. Neo saw it at once, her eyes gone sharp and slitted. What? She liked chocolate. I'm sorry. Summer's smile returned, softer this time. Here, sweetheart. Are you hungry? Neo's hand snaked out over Naruto's shoulder to snatch it up. She crammed it into her mouth and ate quickly, never once taking her eyes off the huntress. Said huntress quirked a brow. Quite attached to you, isn't she? Naruto shrugged. She'll grow out of it. Neo balked at him. She most assuredly would not. The huntress saw that too, in her and her clever eyes. Whatever you say. Summer bumped Naruto with her hip. He didn't push her off. Instead he looked away as she leaned her head against his chest. Silver eyes looked up, seeking his. I really did miss you, you know. Naruto muttered something that might have been along the same lines. Neo choked down her unexpected meal and renewed her scrutiny of the unlikely duo from her perch. Wait a minute. Were they? They might be. She couldn't be sure. Though she was but little, she wasn't stupid. She knew the signs. You didn't grow up in the streets of Vale without learning a few things. They looked comfortable with one another sure enough. Summer was downright at her ease with him. Neo wasn't sure how to feel about that. Let's go home. That she liked. It didn't feel safe out here. The sooner they boarded the bullhead and got out of here, the better. A dark shape burst from the tree line behind them. Neo barely saw it. Whatever it was fast. Too fast. Long and sleek, twisted and wrong, white, jaws gaping wide. Naruto spun and she lost sight of it as he raised an armored arm. His gauntlet barked and the grimm, she certainly saw it now, flew back with a startled yowl. Another arm came up and a jet of flame erupted from an odd device there, bathing the beast in a torrent of naked napalm. Incredibly, it thrashed upright. A clawed paw swept out at Naruto, causing him to scramble back lest he risk Neo. Summer saw it and scowled. Oh, no you don't. Mighty light burst from her eyes and the beast crashed backward with a yowl, clawing at its masked face. It surged upright again with a body howl and lunged. Another blast hit it in mid-stride, sending it crashing through the undergrowth. A third put it down. Its body toppled backward with a noise that could only loosely be called a scream. Well, Summer turned with a huff, scrubbing at her eyes with the back of a hand. That was bracing. Let's be off before more. Behind the creature shuffled upright with an awful crack, a broken puppet without strings. Neo saw its face. Had she possessed a voice, she would have screamed. Wrong, 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 wrong. It was all wrong. Its body was grim, that much was certain. But where the beast's head had been, a human stared out at them, warped and disfigured, half their visage gone gray by Summer's eye blast. Black tears ran from their visible eye, but it nevertheless had a face beneath the blackness. A human face, hideous and twisted, barely recognizable, but still painfully real. A bleary silver iris glowered out at them as an inky black limb stretched out and set itself with an awful crack. And then, incredibly, it spoke to the three of them. Take ... the girl. Naruto's tan face turned ashen. What in the world? It lurched forward. Take the girl. Summer stilled. Did it just? Neo wanted to whimper. Grimm didn't look this. Grimm weren't human. Grimm didn't speak, yet this one did. A lone eye fixed firmly upon her quivering form, to the exclusion of all else. It didn't even seem to see her guardians. It only had eyes for her. What had it said? Take the girl. Take her. What did it want with her? She didn't want to find out. Take ... the girl. It flailed upright, growing a new arm. Take the girl. Neo dropped off Naruto's back and scuttled behind his legs. Take the girl. The creature rasped guttural at them. Naruto and Summer moved to meet its charge. Take the girl. Take the girl. Naruto hit it first. His axe ripped and tore into his horrible hide, but the beast tore right back, snarling and spitting like the monstrosity it was. BLD spurted in the air. Naruto's left eye vanished in a red mist, alongside half his face. It regrew a heartbeat later and he reared back, driving his skull into the beast's snout. It recoiled, badly startled by the glow, and he took the chance, leaped onto the beast's back and locked both legs around its neck. His axe arced up in a frosty arc and came down thrice as fast, slamming into the abomination's chest with a dull crunch. The hound howled in pain. Naruto struck again, forsaking his axe to draw a pair of wicked-looking daggers from his sleeves. They slammed down onto between the beast's shoulders. He yelped and a third arm burst from its back to claw at the blonde's exposed face. He toppled back with a snarl and slammed a strange blue sphere into its spine. That only enraged it further as it bore him down to the ground. Man and monster grappled with one another, thrashing upon the ground like a pair of mad devils. Summer cried out, "Hold on!" She vanished and her weapon flashed out in a blinding arc. Neo couldn't quite see it. What was it? A sword? A scythe? Some appealing blend of the two. It didn't matter. Her weapon found purchase and caught the beast by its left flank. A limb sailed away in a stream of jet-black darkness. Naruto kicked out with both feet, hurling the beast away. Summer swooped into support. His axe came up and hacked down. Her weapon carved a path of brilliant light, making quick work of its claws. Still the beast didn't fall. A clawed hand stretched towards Neo. Take ... the ... girl ... Shut up. Naruto's axe crunched into its ribs. The hound, for Neo could think to call it nothing else, buckled with a roar. Summer's sword met in on the other side and its twisted spine hunched further. Hunter and Huntress shared a meaningful glance and moved as one. Together, they cleaved the abomination and twined low at the waist. Its severed halves flew apart with nary a sound. The beast's upper torso sheared off and went flying away into the forest. Its legs were left to slump listlessly without their better half. They didn't stay to see if it survived. Bullhead, the blonde roared. No, Neo was already 3 steps ahead of them. Together, the unlikely trio clambered aboard and the engines howled to life as the frantic pilot spurred the craft into the sky. Within moments they were away. No one looked back. Neo, unable to think of anything else, found herself forced to revise her opinion of Summer Rose as the world shrank below them. The woman had stood for her, fought for her. She could have easily fled to the bullhead and abandoned them. But she hadn't. Instead, she had stood her ground and fought in spite of her fear. That meant something. She meant something. Resolve hardened in her little heart. She tugged her sleeve and looked up, made sure Summer was looking back. She mouthed a single word. Naruto saw it, even if he couldn't hear it. "Mama," Summer sputtered. "Hey?" And that, as they say, was that. "Do you have her?" Naruto did not roll his eyes. He didn't sigh. He certainly didn't consider crushing his scroll in his fist. Nope, never. Not him. Not for a moment. Anyone who said otherwise was a filthy liar and a cheat. And if Neo still perched on his back like the little spider monkey she was, happened to see the faint flicker of displeasure that flitted across his scarred face. And if she happened to giggle silently, well, he wouldn't tell anyone. She certainly wouldn't. He shared a conspiratorial wink with her and shifted the scroll against his shoulder. "Nuo, I'm calling you to ask about the weather," he drawled, staring up into the cloudy afternoon sky as he walked. "How's it over there in Vale, Oz?" "I hear it's raining." Neo tittered soundlessly. Summer snickered behind him. Ospen saw it and sighed. "Sarcasm does not become you, old friend." The ghost of a smile quirked his lips. "Then don't go asking me stupid questions." "Of course I have her." "See." Briefly SWCH the call to video rather than audio. He angled the scroll over his shoulder so Neo could see the man within. She perked up and squinted at Ospen. The headmaster blinked back, startled by her mismatching eyes, even as they trailed bits of flame. Seeing was believing, as they said. Seeing the fall maiden for himself would quell his paranoia more than any half-hearted speech. He hadn't felt the need to give one of those since Mountain Glen. BSDRD still had that speech playing there. "Fair enough. Might I ask where you are?" "Patch." The wayward shinobi thumbed the call back to audio and pressed it against his right ear. "Stopping by to check in on the runt." "I see." Ospen sounded a little crestfallen. "I had hoped you would bring her straight to Vale." Naruto frowned. "Oz, forgive an old man for his impatience. I simply wish to protect her." Ospen could be a man with a one-track mind at times. While he could appreciate that from one warrior to another, even sympathize it, the fact remained that it grated on the nerves sometimes. Duty was all well and good, laudable even, but his fellow immortal was beginning to take shortcuts he didn't like. Naruto would do things at his own pace. Not before, not after. "Do you have any leads on the other maidens?" And there it was. Oz, no. Summer found her voice at last, arching in a reprimand. "You can't send him out again. He just got back." I was not suggesting he throw himself back into the fray so soon, merely that it would be prudent to share information. Neo quirked a brow. Naruto shrugged. He's spending a few days with me in Patch. Remarkably, the huntress put her foot down. Leave off it. He's been working himself to the bone these last few weeks. Little Neo could use a break herself. She flashed the exhausted girl a wink and a grin to chase the words down. Let it go, will you? You named her. She scowled. He did. Got a problem with that. A lengthy pause followed. I do not. Be that as it may. Summer snatched the scroll from his grasp and snarled into it. Let it go. I've got a few clones wandering around, one for each kingdom. Naruto plucked it back from her and honestly, faced on a neutral mask as he spoke into the scroll. Haven't found anything yet. I'll keep you posted. He could hear the raised brow, such was the pause that heralded its arrival. And your contacts in Menagerie. I said every kingdom. Sandstorm popped my clone in Vacuo, though. Nasty place. I see. Please let me know if you find anything. I'll see you in a few days. There was a brief pang of hesitation, longer than the last. Forgive me if I sound like a broken record, but I feel this bears repeating. Keep that girl close. Salem has begun to move. You know what this means. If she manages to secure even a single maiden. Naruto felt Neo cling just a little tighter to him. I won't let that happen. I'm sure you won't. I have the utmost faith in your abilities. I'll have a bottle waiting for you whenever you arrive. Naruto muttered a half-hearted farewell and closed down the scroll. The first thing he saw was Summer's red face. You stuck up for me. He frowned. Why? Silver eyes fluttered in a brief blink. MILY. She muttered. Naruto paused. Say again. I said your family. The tips of her ears burned cherry pink. I'm not gonna let Ospen bully you like that ... or allow you to hair off into danger without me. Not anymore. Neo laughed soundlessly on his back. And I'm certainly going to be keeping an eye on you. This again. The warrior sighed. I already told you I wasn't in any danger. Not my point. She stomped a boot, crossed both arms beneath her bosom and huffed. We're a team. You're my partner. A rare flash of anger gleamed through her gaze before she suppressed it. Yet at the fifth sign of danger you just wade right in without a care in the world. Are you trying to die? Was he? Not really. He had a task to attend to at the time. A mission. Besides, he moved faster alone. It'll take more than a few grimm to kill me. Neo swatted his shoulder, drawing a scowl from him. What? It's true. Summer gave him a pitying look. All things die, Naruto. He shook his head and walked on. Not me. Summer scampered after him. Are you really that dense? She drew even with him quickly and looped her arm in his. I know you've got a heart of stone and all, but really, is your brain thick as a brick? Hey, don't give me the silent treatment. You're not Neo. Naruto unbent enough to sigh as they traipsed ever onward. Noisy girl. He speaks again. Her giggle filled his ears. You won't be rid of me that easily. Sometimes, Naruto wondered if he would ever understand Summer Rose. On a good day she was all smiles and sunshine, but beneath that she was sheer steel. Sometimes she could be a walking bundle of contradictions, at others she was pure as the driven snow. Ordinarily she would be the first to fling herself into danger, certainly when innocents were involved. But when it came to him she became downright silly, always touching with her. Touching. He wasn't bothered by it, he just found it odd. If touching his arm or holding his hand made her feel better, then who was he to dissuade her? Besides, he was comfortable around her, as much as he could be with anyone these days. Comfortable enough to be with her, at least. After all he'd been through, that meant something. He didn't find her unpleasant, even if she was determined to make him smile. It was simple logic, he told himself. Their skills paired well together. Her silver eyes made mincemeat of Grimm, while he dealt with the more human threats. They were a good team. With most of Team STRQ starting to settle down, Summer was more willing to accompany him on his excursions than ever. Logic dictated that he worked better alone, but a second pair of eyes never hurt. Right, useful. Keep lying to yourself. Don't worry. Her fingers threaded within his. I'll crack that rocky exterior of yours yet. You'll help, won't you, Neo? In his peripherals, the little maiden flicked her a thumbs up. Neither gave him time to dwell on it. Come on. Summer dragged him by the hand and tugged him along. We're gonna be late. Neo's head bobbed in agreement. Traitor. Of course she'd side with Summer. She'd chosen her. Summer had no say in the matter. He kept walking. Patch was an idyllic little island, the perfect place to raise a family. Taeyong's home reflected that well, a cozy little cottage nested between a copse of trees. Painted in pleasant and colorful hues, it rather reminded of an overgrown pinata, all bright and fest and lively. Made sense really. Tai was a cheery guy these days. Why wouldn't he be? He had a loving wife and a child he adored with all his heart. If rumors were to be believed, he and Raven were trying to give Young a baby brother. Yang and Yin had a nice ring to it. Yes, the Branwen, Zhao Long family certainly had enough spirit for the both of them. Still, he couldn't help but notice the toys scattered haphazardly about the yard in the patches of burnt grass. Now that brought a smile to his face. Seemed little Yang had been practicing with her semblance. Neo wrinkled her nose at the sight, not quite making the connection. Don't worry. He looked back, catching the mute girl's gaze with his. Young's a bit of a spitfire, but she's harmless for the most part. She did set you on fire once. Summer hummed. Naruto grunted. One time, and you never let me live it down. Neo glanced rapidly between the two of them and smiled one of her little smiles. Wanna get down? To his wry amusement, the little maiden scowled and clung tighter. Fair enough. Summer released his hand, skipped past them, bounded up the steps 2 at a time. She all but flung herself at the door. Clenched knuckles descended in rapid succession, tapping out a familiar rhythm upon the worn red frame. Naruto lingered a step behind her, if only because he knew what was to come. He'd seen their resident firecracker often enough. Not a heartbeat later, footsteps thundered down the stairs, brought on by the pitter-patter of little feet. Neo stiffened. Summer smiled. Naruto sighed. Here we go. He'd only just spoken when someone flung the open. Uncle Naruto. A golden streak hurtled the rest of the way toward the three of them, leaped through the air, and latched onto his now raised right arm like a limpet. Little lilac eyes beamed back at him, framed by an impish smile and a mane of tawny yellow hair brighter than the sun itself. Little legs kicked in the air as she dangled from his limb. Hi, did you miss me? Nope. The barest hint of a smile followed, drawing. A giggle formed the girl draped across his raised limb. Where's your mother? Shiro didn't leave you here alone, did he? Nah, she's upstairs with Daddy. The little hellion wrinkled her nose, still hanging from his arm. Uncle Kuro said they're wrestling or something. Did he now? Naruto leaned over the threshold and found a familiar figure sprawled on the couch. QROW. What? A rough voice drawled from the living room. I didn't lie. Ignorance is bliss for kids these days. Summer turned rose red. Neo scowled at Yang. Naruto reached around to pat her head. Yang noticed at once, clever girl that she was. Who's that? Neo snarled silently. Someone we're looking after. Summer temporized carefully. Oh, Yang's gaze slid past them. Auntie Summer's here, too. Hi, Auntie. Are we having a sleepover? The pair exchanged a rueful look. Something like that. Awesome. Naruto tried to smile as Yang drew them inside. He really did. Still, Ospen's words stuck with him like an angry thorn. It wouldn't let him be. Salem and her minions had nearly found Neo. What did that mean for the other maidens? Children were stubborn. Hazel knew this for a fact, if only because he'd seen it firsthand. Gretchen was much the same, once upon a time. His beloved sister had been many things in her youth. Strong, brave, foolhardy. She thought herself invincible. She believed she could take on the world and win. But she wasn't. In her arrogance, she let herself be deluded by a treacherous parasite. She ignored his dire warnings, brushed him off, and paid the price for it. I'll be fine, Hazel. You worry too much, Hazel. Nothing bad will happen to me, Hazel. But something had happened. A training accident, they said. Hazel knew better. He'd never forgive Ospen for his treachery. Because children were stubborn, prideful, arrogant, easily manipulated. The summer maiden was no different. This little slip of a brunette had been arrogant at first, until he beat the pride out of her. She had fought well for one so young, with cleverness and ingenuity both. All the power in the world meant nothing when your opponent ceased to feel pain. She didn't realize that terrible truth until it was too late. You are beaten. The giant stared down at her, his face shadowed by the blazing sun of vacuo. It is useless to resist. Don't let yourself be destroyed as your predecessor did. Her eyes narrowed as she lay sprawled on the dunes beneath him, wasted and gasping for air. He didn't even remember her name. Better that way. Better to see her as a nameless maiden than as a person, a conduit meant to open Vacuo's vault. If he saw her as anything else, he might hesitate. He already felt sick to his stomach. Best to finish this quickly before her tears swayed him any further. Please just go away. I apologize, he rumbled. I take no pleasure in this. Then leave me alone. She lunged up at him, only to be backhanded to the sands. Hazel watched her force herself up into a sitting position poised to strike at the slightest provocation. She was already wounded and bleeding badly. He didn't want to finish what he had started, but he would do his duty. Surely she would see reason. Her family was already dead, her home in ruins. She owed this kingdom nothing. It certainly didn't care for her. Would it not be better to simply bend the knee and live to fight another day? She could never have her vengeance if she died. Maidens rarely went quietly these days. Salem would be displeased if this one perished, but she would understand if it came down to that. Some knew better than to be taken alive. This one was far too feral for her own good. She would likely keep throwing herself at him until she killed him or he killed her. Pale fingers twitched, curling in the sand. Hazel saw it and growled a warning. Don't make me destroy you. Never. The young maiden flung a sandstorm in his face and vanished among the dunes. Hazel scowled and stormed after her. Another dust crystal came and went. Foolish girl. No one had to die today. Rhodes considered himself a decent huntsman. He liked to think he was a capable sort. He was no Kuro Branwan, but he knew his way around a fight. Life was like a card game in that regard. You had to know when to hold M, when to fold M. He knew when to be firm and when to yield, when to stand his ground and when to run. He knew the difference between a decent fight and suicidal odds. This was not a fight he could win. Yet he had to keep fighting. To stop was to die. Pivoting on one heel, he brought his twin maces down onto the skull of a Beowulf and shattered its skull. Claws skittered off his back, sparking against his hardened skin. Aura quivered but held. Rhodes whirled and drove his head in with an elbow. The sharp crack of a high-caliber round filled his ears and he stumbled as a bullet found his shoulder. Their attacker had emerged seemingly out of nowhere, demanding that he hand the girl over to him. Grimm had come with him, and they obeyed his every command. 1 or 2 he could handle, even a dozen. But this, too many. For every one he felled, 3 more took its place. Yet he fought on. He had to. He must. If he didn't, who would? No one. The answer galled him. The kid was fighting like hell, just as he'd taught her. Those crazy new powers of hers certainly helped ... even if she was being hunted for them. A lesser man would have turned her in for the bounty and made off with the money. He hadn't. Why would he? Had taken her from that awful hotel in Atlas all those years ago. He hadn't abandoned her then and he wouldn't now. They would live and die together. A bullet whistled past at his ear. My, do pay attention, old friend. Rhodes rounded on them. His tormentor was a wiry BSDRD with dark hair, a bristling caterpillar of a mustache, and arrogance to match. Even after all these years, his fashion sense hadn't changed. The rest of him had. He was colder, sharper, an arrogant shadow of a good man. Arthur Watts had always been a bitter BSDRD, but this was cruel even for him. Look what has become of you, Rhodes. He scoffed and began to reload, uncaring for his scorn. A rat in the woods. Look what I've risen above. The huntsman coughed BLD and forced himself to focus. You're a wanted criminal in every kingdom. At least I've made something of my life. So you say. I've come to kill you, his old friend mused, but perhaps it's worse to leave you here, festering in your squalor. You always were nothing compared to me. Ever the idealist. A mace swept over his head, made sluggish by hours of fighting. Arthur ducked, raised an arm, and his revolver barked once, bruising him beneath his aura. Always looking for the light in others. Another round, another spasm. That's the difference between you and I. Have always seen the world for what it is. But you. A vicious sweep sent the wounded warrior sprawling. You have ever been a fool. Watts stepped back, evading the retaliatory swipe with a smile. You're getting slow, my friend. How much longer can you last? For the sake of our friendship, I'll give you one last chance. Surrender the maiden to me, and you can live. For old time's sake. And there it was. He'd nearly forgotten about the man's ego. Arthur always liked to brag, even in their youth. He'd only grown worse with age. But he was no fool. He wouldn't dare try his hand in close combat unless he was certain of his victory. That he'd done so now was troubling. No love for old friends here, it seemed. If you define yourself by your power to take, Rhodes felt his voice broke for a moment as he forced himself upright, and the longing to dominate, to possess superiority over others. You have nothing. Only your ego. That earned him a snarl from his former friend, followed a vicious kick. And what do you have? You're the one about to be left with nothing. You're wrong. Rhodes tried to laugh, his lungs wouldn't allow it. All that emerged was a sigh. I'm richer than you'll ever be. Ahead of him, the kid went down, mobbed by dozens of grimm. Rhodes swore softly and lurched towards her. Cinder. He realized the mistake even as he made it. In his rage, Arthur showed no mercy. A bullet tore through Rhodes' flagging aura and ripped into his back. For once, his semblance failed him. Pain seared through his spine. He slammed down on one knee. Another round pierced his defenses and a thin line of red ran down the corner of his mouth, followed by a third. Oh, dear. Arthur laughed. You might want to let me look at those wounds. They look quite painful. A wild punch caught the doctor on the chin and launched him back. Uncultured brute. He clambered upright, quivering with fury. You'll pay for that. Rhodes wanted to throttle him, to reach out and snap his neck like a twig. But he couldn't. He hadn't the strength left in him. So this was it, then. Rhodes exhaled in a short, shuddering breath. Not much longer now. His aura was nearly gone and his semblance with it. He'd lost too much BLD. Even now he could feel himself fading. Arthur would want to take him captive, of course, use him as leverage against the kid. She'd become Salem's pawn, be forced to do that monster's bidding till her dying breath. He couldn't allow that. He would not allow that. Watts would make them both suffer in the interim. It was a losing hand no matter how you looked at it. Ahead of him, Cinder fought her way free of the grimm and burst into the air, flames firing from her feet. Eye blazing, chest heaving, her momentum faltered for a moment and she nearly fell into the teeming black and white mass below. There would be no rescue there. She was even more injured than he was. Her lone eye found his, wide and desperate with panic as she gazed upon the sea of grimm below her. She was looking to him for guidance, just as she always had. He could only think of one course that ended with her survival. She would hate him for it. That was fine. Better for her to hate him and be alive than dead. Cinder. He raised his voice. If you can hear me, rain fire. An awful silence followed his words. Arthur scoffed into it. What are you on about? I can't. I'll hit you. On a thread of breath, he thought he heard a voice. Her voice. Dad. You'll die. Nothing. Rhodes croaked out a tired wheeze of a laugh and continued. Nothing can stop that now. Do it. That's an order. She shook her head, a constellation of tears on her lashes. No, Cinder. His daughter gathered her power close unto her, wrapping it around her body like a second skin. Her remaining eye flashed a molten shade of gold, trailing flames. All around her the air boiled, shivering with tendrils of luminescent light, threading through her flesh, weaving their way through the soil, contorting the very air itself. A keening sound forced itself through her teeth as she tucked her head into her chest. He recognized the cry for what it was and winced. But when next her gaze rose, resolve burned there. Resolve, in sorrow. Arthur swore and drew a bead on her. Blast it, Cinder shrieked. I'm sorry. Watts fired. A fiery blast of napalm erupted like a volcano, rendering his bullet so much slag and scouring the grimm for miles in every direction. It struck the trees and bathed them in flame, dry wood igniting almost instantly. Arthur was lucky. His aura reserves were full. He saw the attack coming and pushed the brunt of them forward to lessen the blast. Rhodes wasn't so fortunate, but that had been his intent. He lowered the last of his aura just to be sure and let it hit him full on. He closed his eyes as the flames came. The smallest of smiles creased his face. That's my girl. There was no pain, just a moment of wild heat. Then he was gone. Bloody fool. Arthur stumbled out of the smoke, coughing harshly. I didn't think he was suicidal. What kind of fool gives such an order? A towering fireball split the gloom to tear his head off. It would have too, if one of the Grimm hadn't taken the blast for him. He skittered back, wary of another such blast, but it never came. A cursory inspection confirmed his suspicions. He had few wounds to speak of and most of them were minor burns. She'd expended the last of her strength just now. He could still salvage this. The maiden was right there, exhausted by her last-ditch attack. He still had some Grimm left. He could take her. Salem would praise him for his triumph and his old friend would be naught but ash. Victory was his to claim. He just needed to reach out and grasp it. Come now, must you be difficult? Join us, or die. He offered his hand to the girl in question. You're already down an arm and an eye. Do you truly wish to die like your father? Cinder exhaled in a sharp burst of anger. And in that moment, Watts understood her. She had no longing to live without Rhodes. His mistake. Without him, she thought herself nothing. He'd saved her from a fate worse than death and in her mind it was only right she follow him into it. Perhaps that was a twisted mindset for a child to have. Clearly this one had never been a normal child to begin with. A child who lost the only thing she loved. Work with you. Never. A blazing amber iris narrowed upon him, gone wild with grief and despair. There are things worse than death. Watts realized what she intended too late. Stop her, you fools. He commanded the remaining Grimm. She's going to. Cinder slammed a fist into the ground and unleashed the last of her power. It scorched her broken body just like her namesake. Cinder died with a smile on her face. Schnee ran for her life. She ran and ran and ran, not once daring to look back. Bare feet pelted against the cold street at a breakneck pace, little legs pumping frantically as she fled. She had to keep running. She couldn't stop. The moment she did they would be on her. They would grab her again and hold her down and ... Crazed laughter chased after her. Little maiden, come out and play. She pivoted on one heel and flung a hail of ice at him. It struck the street before him and shattered on contact, kicking up a cloud of steam. Wild white hair flashed in the breeze, framing ice blue eyes burning with azure flames as her chest heaved for breath. She clutched her side, wincing at the wound there and dared to hope. Was not to be. Tyrian Kalos emerged, tutting softly. Now, that wasn't very nice, little Schnee. His tail swayed behind him, still dripping with BLD. Naughty girls should be disciplined. Weiss turned and fled. Behind her the Schnee family manor burned, a bright beacon in the dark. Tongues of hungry flame stretched fiery fingers into the night. Weiss liked fire. Fire was good and clean and safe. Fire kept the monsters away. But not tonight. Not for her. Tonight the night was dark and full of terrors. And she was alone. Her family was dead, slaughtered to a man. Not even the servants were spared. This was a bad dream. A nightmare. It had to be. I'm sorry. Her mind wailed as she raced around a corner and into an alley. Please, let me wake up. I'll be good. But begging wouldn't bring them back. She knew that. Such a shame, a new voice crooned behind her. If they had only given you up, they might still be alive. She wanted to turn and fight, but she couldn't. She tried that. She wasn't strong enough. Her family fought for her already, buying her time to escape with their own BLD. Even poor Klein stood in the madman's way by the end ... for all of a moment. But like Mommy and Daddy, he was gone. Winter was gone too, run through by the hooded man and the woman with him. They were all gone. Dead, because of her. Because they'd kept her secret. And they'd paid for it with their lives. An abrupt explosion lit the street before the last Schnee, ripping her from her feet and casting her back. Heat scorched her face and she cried out, averting her gaze. Do you see now how fruitless this is, child? A new figure strode through the smoke, clad in riding LTHR, their face hidden by an emerald hood. Surrender and this can all ... be ... over. Weiss slammed upright and crawled back like a drunken crab. Her back struck a boot. She looked up, already knowing what she would find there. A chitinous tail coiled about her wrist, hoisting her upright with a painful wrench. A tiny keening cry fled from her lips. Now, there's no need for tears. We just want to be friends. Tyrian tutted, grinning down at her. Though I hope you won't mind if I take a finger or two. That's enough, Tyrian. The woman reprimanded him. We're not here to kill her. For a moment, Weiss wondered if he would. This man was twisted, dark, wrong. He enjoyed killing. She'd seen it firsthand. He wanted to hurt her, break her, like he had the others. Manic glee sprang to life in his eyes and her mind gibbered at the sight of it. Logic meant nothing to this man. To him, reason was not but a word. Remarkably, he demurred and lowered her to the ground. Ah, yes, so says Amber the Merciful. He laughed, swaying in place. Amber the Benevolent. Amber the Beloved. Blessed by our most holy queen. This close, she could see her. Weiss glimpsed a bit of the woman's face beneath that worn cowl. What she saw there had her crying out in fresh fear. Her skin ... it looked wrong, all wrong. Tan on one side and pale upon the other, veins of scarlet scrawling through her visage like the blackest corruption. Strands of brown hair were flecked. Stop your prattling, the monstrous woman rasped. Now are you ready to come with me? Weiss shrank back. Come with you. Your family's gone now, dear girl. The hooded woman regarded her intently, amber eyes flashing beneath her cowl. You no longer have any reason to be here. A tan hand was offered to her, palm over. Come with us and open the vault, then we can be done with this. A pause, as she considered the matter further. Or I can take the power from your corpse. Either way, this farce will be over. It's your choice. Weiss twitched. Farce. Mother died for her. Winter died for her. Father died for her. And she dared to call this a farce. She bit her lip and clenched her teeth, grinding them together until she tasted BLD in her mouth. Something cracked in the back of her jaw. She ignored it. The woman was still speaking to her, but she could no longer hear her. Everything was faint, distant, muted. Her eyes burned anew. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. She was going to be killed no matter what she did. Deep inside her soul, something cracked. It was her sanity. Baleful blue eyes rose, brimming with wrathful flame. Tyrion saw it. So too did the hooded woman. Die. Tyrion released her wrist and swayed backward, spine contorting at a horrific angle. A towering spear of ice slammed into the space he'd vacated a heartbeat before. Bereft of its target, it howled past and eviscerated a nearby building. With a put-upon sigh, the fauna straightened his back and stood. His smile had returned. How rude. Weiss couldn't hear him. Die, die. She brought her hands together and gigantic palms of ice manifested to clap down on either side of her, forcing her foes back. Weiss saw her chance and stumbled to her feet. She raised her hands, and the frozen palms obeyed their MSDRS. One caught Tyrion in mid-flight and crashed him against a wall. Amber intercepted the other with a raised hand, and it withered away like so much ash. Really, you're only delaying the inevitable. Die, die, die. Spikes of ice perforated the air like a murder of crows. Tyrion came flying back at her, only to be caught by a wicked spike under his knee. Weiss saw it and pounced. All her grief, all her rage, all her sorrow. All of it, let loose in a single instant. Unleashed now, upon her foes. Wind howled and a storm shrieked into existence in the streets, bringing with all the fury of a little girl who had lost everyone and everything she'd ever loved. Weiss didn't let up. She battered them against the walls of the alley, smashed them against the ground, rammed them into one another. She didn't dare relent, if only because she knew what awaited her if she stopped. The moment she dropped her arms, they'd be on her. There would be no second chances. Enough. Amber raised her voice and leveled her staff, fire flickering at its tip in the gale. If you want death that badly, I'll mind if I step in. Weiss jolted as rustle of cloth interposed itself between the three of them. There was no transition between one moment and the next. First there was empty, frigid air before, and then quite suddenly, she found herself staring at a broad back. The sudden sight of someone, a masked man, standing between her and her adversaries jerked the little maiden out of her searing rage. And with the loss of her anger, so too went her control. Her power slipped away through her fingers, the bite of a bitter winter slipping away. She couldn't see much of him beneath the worn gray cloak. Even if she had, she wouldn't have noticed. Her attention was already drawn elsewhere. Weiss yelped, Winter, because there, slung over his shoulder like a bag of wheat, bloodied and battered, was the last living member of her family. Her mind balked at the gentle rise and fall of her elder sister's chest. That shouldn't be possible. She'd seen them die. They'd been run through, gutted like a pig. Yet here she was, sporting a clumsy crimson bandage around her torso. Amber's reaction proved more explosive. You, a low snarl filled the air. Quick as a golden flash, the masked man ripped a long rifle from his back and unloaded on them, his weapon bucking with each discharge. His rifle barked and Tyrion shot backward, squealing like a stuck pig as one of those blue bolts caught him in the chest. Unfortunately, the hooded woman was quicker on the uptake and managed to get her staff around in time. She swatted the first shot aside, then a second, followed by a third, intercepting each with callous ease. She wasn't prepared for him to abandon the weapon entirely and bring his hands together in a sharp clap. Amateur. It wasn't strong to hear the sneer in his voice. Dark swamp. With a wretched squelching sound, the very street turned to mud beneath Amber's feet, SCK and clawing at her boots. She snarled and reached down to tear herself free, only to find an arm likewise trapped. Her staff came around, only to be caught by the clawing tendrils as well. She was still struggling when the masked man removed his mask. Weiss glimpsed blue eyes and blonde hair framed by whiskered cheeks. Then her unlikely ally roared and fireball burst from his mouth and plowed into the noxious gases within the fallow mire he'd created. The blast that followed was nothing short of spectacular. That hideous swamp didn't simply explode, it absolutely erupted. Still caught in the muck, her tormentor shrieked in pain and vanished in the blaze. Weiss managed to close her eyes in time and she still saw the blast burn behind her eyelids. Head spinning, ears ringing, she dared to creak a blur iris open. Nothing remained of the alley. No, wait, she told a lie. But a burning wasteland really couldn't be called something now, could it? Of Tyrion and Amber she saw no sign. She didn't know if they'd fled or been obliterated by the blast. She hoped it was the later. Spirits, she hoped it hurt. Then the once masked man rounded on her and she had something else to fear. Weiss shrank back half a pace, eyes wide. He dealt with her attackers. Would he turn on her now? Quickly, no attack came. Instead he hissed at her, offering her his hand. Come with me if you want to live. Weiss flicked a glance to Winter's prone form, still draped over his shoulder. Her breathing had grown irregular. Will you save her? Yes. Whiskered cheeks pinched in a scowl. I'll do everything in my power, but I'm just a clone. I need to get you out of here while I still have chakra. No, a blonde brow quirked, surveying the ruined alley and the still burning street just beyond it. Unless you'd rather take your chances here. Weiss balked and shook her head, sending her hair swaying. Stay here, alone, at night, in the cold. No, thank you. There was nothing left in Atlas now. Not for her but pain and misery. The SDC, irrelevant. She'd never had a chance of inheriting. That honor would go to Winter ... if she survived. She had to survive. They didn't dare remain here. Her wounded heart cried out at all she'd lost, but she couldn't bring herself to shed any more tears. They had frozen for a time, just like the rest of her, but even now her anger was beginning to thaw in place of her sorrow. There would be time for tears later. Right now, she just wanted to curl up in a warm bed and sleep. And if that meant trusting a stranger, so be it. Pale, trembling fingers curled around his calloused palm. He granted her a careworn smile. Good girl. Then they ran like hell. Naruto rolled over in bed. A realization hit him a moment later. This wasn't his bed. These weren't his sheets. As always, there was a brief moment of weightless panic as his mind thrashed its way out of another nightmare. His return to the waking world seldom proved peaceful these days, and this was no exception. The fear and confusion passed in due time, they always did. The immortal grit his teeth and rode them out, MSTR himself even as his heart P&D angrily in his chest. His body shifted a little as he propped himself up on his elbows. He remembered where he was a moment later, even as his mind ticked through his surroundings with the cold efficiency of a machine. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. Sunlight spilled through a nearby window, bathing him in the bed in golden glow, cast against faded white walls. Ty's place. Guest room. They'd spent the night here. Well, several nights now. Neo had begun to settle in here, skittish little thing though she still was, and Summer wasn't in any hurry to leave after their last mission. Speaking of which, where? Morning. Summer's chin came up over his shoulder with a tiny yawn, her bare body spooning against his shoulders. Full chest pressed into his back as she planted her lips against the back of his head, only to nuzzle his neck with a wordless hum. Naruto stole a glance at her as she cuddled closer. Hair tousled, silver eyes half-lidded from sleep and still smelling faintly of last night's wild endeavor, she still seemed perfect to him. Indeed, she almost seemed to glow in the sunlight. Now she was scowling at him. Oh, right. A response. Should probably give one of those. She bit his ear. He frowned at her. Oh, what was that for? Don't you owe me, mister? You're not a caveman. She pushed him back down to the bed with a laugh. I said good morning. Naruto rolled his eyes. Good morning. There, I said it, same as yesterday. Happy now? Very much so, yes. Quick as a flash she climbed atop him. I'll fix you yet. Silver eyes met blue. Unlikely, but he wasn't about to argue with her. Silver-eyed warriors were stubborn. Instead, he leaned back and let her have her way with him. Summer was always rowdy come morning. She nipped at his neck, drawing another frown from him. Already, you're insatiable. She didn't dignify that with a proper response. Instead, her mouth fastened to his once more, tongue ruthlessly plundering his with reckless abandon. Naruto yielded to her with a sigh as her lips melded with his own. Her hands threaded around his neck as his own came to rest upon her hips, guiding her home. Their bodies came together as they always did. He sheathed himself in her and she did that wonderful trick with her hips, rolling her body against his in visceral grace. In moments they fell into a familiar rhythm born from years of practice. Summer's head tilted back in bliss as she gave a less than subtle cry, one she wasn't quite able to muffle in time. Boy, both of you. Someone's fist banged against the wall. Keep it down over there. We're trying to sleep. The huntress laughed, hips quivering, eyes lidded in bliss. Screw off, Ray. You're just as rowdy. Nevertheless, she tumbled off him and tucked her head into his chest. Naruto looped an arm around her waist and let her press close. She mumbled something into his neck. The word love might have been hidden in there somewhere. He tried not to pay attention. In hindsight, he couldn't rightly say why he kept falling into bed with Summer. Love, lust, it wasn't something he planned. It just happened, more often than not. Every now and again she'd give him a look, take him by the hand, and lead him upstairs. He let her. Perhaps it was her smile. Maybe she was one of the few people who could tolerate his long silences. It could have been any number of things. Honestly, he didn't see what she saw in him. He had given up trying to understand her long ago. Her fingers danced along his ribs and a grunt escaped him. You smiled for a bit there. He hid it behind a scowl. Did not. Did so. Her forehead embraced his with a laugh. Honestly, she could be such a child sometimes. That wasn't the reason he tolerated her. In truth, it was simple. Summer Rose was pure, a quality most folk lacked in this wicked world. Not the good kind of good, but the sort you might expect to find in a fairy tale. Pure as the driven snow. Not a single mean bone in her body. Sure, she could be a bit aggressive when they made love, but beyond that she had few flaws to speak of. This was a woman he could understand, respect even, because she wouldn't hesitate to fight for those she cared about. He'd been like that once. Before, some small sliver of his shattered soul recognized a kindred spirit. He wanted to protect that. Suo, she grinned up at him like the imp she was. How do you feel about children? Naruto coughed, a rare flush flooding his cheeks. Do you mean Neo? Right, Neo, of course. Something flickered in her face, puzzling him. Her smile returned and she forgot it. She's adopted us, you realize. There's no escaping her now. She'll probably be up and at us any second now after the ruckus we made. Still, the silence loomed between them. Wait, did you think I meant ... Oh. Her face burned to match her namesake. I mean, I wouldn't mind and all, but isn't that a bit of a leap? You're the one who said it. Naruto wrinkled his nose at her. You phrased that weird. No, I didn't. Her face went deceptively blank. You're imagining things. Summer. She tucked her head into his chest. Nope. No. He growled. Not that again. Still she smiled. Nope. Her face told of some silent secret he wasn't able to read, one she seemed determined to protect at all costs. Honestly, there was no arguing with her when she got like this. Whatever she wanted to tell him, she would in due time. Definitely. Hopefully. Maybe. But, hypothetically, if we were talking about children, her lips brushed his, sending a small shiver shooting through him. How does Ruby sound? For a single senseless second Naruto actually did imagine in Daddy, a little girl with Summer's eyes gazed up at him, her dark red hair framed by pale whiskered cheeks in a silly grin. Little arms stretched toward him. Up. His mouth worked wordlessly for a moment before he MSDR himself. Hypothetically, right. I think that sounds like a wonderful nah. All at once the door crashed open, causing him to blink, drawn out of that strange thought. Neo sauntered in, saw them, and her eyes all but lit up. Naruto saw her and hauled on a pair of boxers for decency's sake. Just as well too, because Neo wasn't the sort to wait for anything else. She darted forward, vaulted the bed with eerie grace, and landed squarely between the two of them, uncaring of their nakedness. Summer squeaked in surprise and hauled the sheets up above her chest with one arm. Now she reacted, the silly girl, while corralling their adoptive child with the other. Neo, sweetie, don't scare us like that. The little hellion only pee her head to one side. Her lips parted then moved slowly, framing a single phrase. Nope. No. That's my word. Naruto watched the chaos unfold with a sigh. One was more than enough. Still, the image persisted. Maybe another wouldn't be so bad. Not likely to happen, though. He hadn't been able to have children for some time. Sage knew he had tried before. It just didn't happen. Summer was a simple gal. Not that kind of simple, mind you. She knew what she liked, what she disliked, what she loved, and what she hated. For instance, Summer Rose was still rather cross with one Raven Branwen for stealing away her first love. Of course, she adored Yon. She'd always wanted to be an aunt and little ball of sunshine that she was. Summer knew she wouldn't trade her niece for the world. They were just something a gal could forgive, but never forget. Conversely, she found herself rather fond of Naruto. He was a good fighter, an admirable friend, and an excellent ... Another word that started with F1 that involved silk sheets and tangled bodies. She wouldn't be speaking that word in range of the children. Heart of stone though he had, that heart was known to fracture on occasion. It wasn't much, and not often, but in those moments, she sometimes glimpsed the man he had once been. The man he still was, underneath it all. The man she wanted to help. The man she wanted to save. The man she'd fallen in love with. She saw the shadow of that man now as he carried an exuberant Neo upon his shoulders around and about the yard. The little maiden looked utterly at her ease, legs swing to and fro as she rode her gallant steed into battle against Yang and Tai with all her might. A rare smile spread across Summer's face as Neo waved her hands in the air without a care in the world. And if one looked closely, squinted really, they might see a smile on Naruto's face as they grappled. Heh, softy. Speaking of soft, Naruto cried out in a rare moment of triumphant as Tai toppled backward into the grass. Neo pumped a fist with a silent shout. Hiro looked up from his chair and raised his flask in salute. Raven looked up from her meal on the porch and quirked a brow, but offered no words of rebuke. Summer soon saw why. Sure enough, father and daughter sprang back up, demanding a rematch. Naruto made to refuse, but Neo tugged at his hair and spurred him forward again. Softy indeed. He didn't want to refuse her, it seemed. Softy, hey. Young's voice split the air in a whine. No fair. You cheated. Neo made a come-hither motion with her hand. Lilac eyes blazed red. I'll get Yahoo. Raven chuckled at their antics, a low bemused sound that startled Summer and had Tai shaking his head. She looked away from the playground scuffle and stole a glance at Kuro's sister. Now that she noticed, Raven was looking rather soft herself. She hadn't bothered to spar against either of them yet. Spirits, she didn't even have her sword with her. And that was a rather large breakfast. Could she be? Silver eyes narrowed. Red orbs met hers across the way and refused to flinch. Even in a dress she remained every bit the warrior she'd once been. In the end, the younger huntress found herself forced to look away. The thought should have been an ember of hope, instead it lodged in her thoughts like a shard of glass. If so, she was happy for her old teammate. Unfortunately, it brought her own predicament to mind. Fear reared its ugly head in her heart. Summer touched a hand to her own stomach. Maybe she was overreacting. It was probably nothing. After all, she wasn't that late. It couldn't possibly mean that. Could it? I don't wanna die. Yet it seemed death had come for Arslan Alton regardless of her wishes. Everything hurt. Her arms, her back, her legs, everything. And yet all she could do was crawl in the sand. Her dark complexion was scuffed and bloodied, yellow robe a tattered mess, her shoes long since worn away by battle and platinum blonde hair matted down with BLD. Most of it was her own, and it kept getting into her olive green eyes. The flames there burned bright as ever, a constant source of anxiety as the little girl trudged through the wastes of vacuo. Nor was there any help to be had on that front. Even now at this late hour, the desert was as inhospitable as it was cruel. There could be no other word for this barren continent, this ruined stretch of land. No villages nearby, and Shade Academy wasn't little more than a distant silhouette on the horizon. She'd been running for so long now, but here at last, she'd reached her limits. So hungry, so thirsty, so tired, and in a few moments, so very, very dead. She'd run away from the giant before, managed to escape him and dive under the sands for a time, but he had found her and broken her arm since. When he caught her a second time, he'd break her legs, no doubt. Then she wouldn't be able to run anymore. The notion terrified her. She stole a glance over her shoulder. Sure enough, there he was. Even now Hazel Raynard gave chase, slowly plodding after her with all the patience of a sloth. He seemed content to let her exhaust herself now, wary to keep his distance after she'd taken one of his ears. Her eyes fixed on the red ruin she'd left upon the right side of his face. Good. She hoped it hurt. Cease this foolishness. He called out after her. The sun is setting. Submit and I can tend to your wounds. A snarl tore out of her. Like you tended to my family. Never. They made their choice. No one had to die today. Arslan grit her teeth and dragged herself forward. I'll kill you. She spat her curse into the sands. I'll absolutely kill you. I swear it. If it's the last thing I do. She wouldn't die here. She refused to die here. If she fell, no, it meant her family, her brothers and sisters, had died for nothing. Hate was all that kept her going. Hate and fear. Fear of what might happen if she perished without avenging her family. But while the spirit was willing, the flesh was weak. Her good arm betrayed her at last, weak fingers curling loosely around Grain, and his shadow loomed large over her prone form. A fist slammed down at her face. I am sorry. Arslan's life flashed before her eyes. No. In a final fit of defiance, she flung a hand into the sky and shrieked. The heavens answered. Lightning forked down from the skies above, all her stress, all her rage, all her sorrow made manifest in a singular bolt of light. A great purple-white bolt slammed down into the sands and turned them to glass in a furious explosion of heat, visible for miles in every direction. Caught unawares by the sudden volley, her attacker stumbled back, shielding his face with a massive forelimb. But only for a moment. Her strike had been a wild and reckless one, a last-ditch effort to strike her foe down, and it had only left him all the angrier. Enough of this. He staggered upright, blinking the spots out his eyes. If you will not be taken alive, then you will be slain. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. Would you care to repeat that, you son of a bitch? Hazel's whirled around and struck strong, harder than anything Arslan had ever seen. His fist smacked into an open palm with a dull shockwave. Arslan didn't see Hazel grimace as a dozen tiny cuts blossomed across his limb. But she felt his fear all the same. She heard it as he recoiled with a yowl. She knew it as his attacker stepped in and clamped down upon his fist, grinding the knuckle bones together with an audible crunch. She understood it as his captor reeled him in and slammed a knee into his stomach with enough force to rupture his kidneys. Hazel doubled over with a low wheeze, gasping for air, not quite comprehending his peril. Arslan did, and she grinned with bloody teeth. For this was the same fear she'd felt all day. Now it was his turn to feel fear. Big man. A low voice pierced the gloom. Bullying a little girl in the dead of night. Pick on someone your own size. Although the giant tried to pull away, his captor held him tight. You. Blue eyes burned gold. Me. They blurred. Arslan couldn't find any other word for the whirlwind of combat that followed. Had the heat finally gotten to her? Was this real? She wasn't sure. She still wasn't, even when the newcomer rammed a glowing blue sphere into Hazel's chest and launched him away. In that moment, she saw her savior. Don't worry. A tanned face gazed at her over one shoulder, exposing whiskered cheeks and startling golden eyes framed by sunny blonde hair. It's going to be all right now. Despite her best efforts, the summer maiden whimpered a little as he pivoted to face her completely. Because those strange golden eyes bored into her now, narrow with rage. Not at her, but anger for her, righteous fury that burned hotter than the sun itself. Even as she struggled to process this, he knelt thrice as quickly and took her by the shoulders. A hand came down on her mangled arm, and with a pulse of healing light, she felt the bone set itself anew. A whisper trailed from her lips. Who are? Stay put. Despite his remedy, those words were brisk, cold like stone. This won't take long. Uzumaki. Across the sands, the giant man thrashed upright with a fearsome bellow. No more tricks. Face me, coward. Stay. That calloused hand stroked Arslan's head once more. I'll be right back. Then the blond man waded towards the giant. Coward, am I? He drew a wickedly long knife from the holster at his leg. Only coward I see here is you, Hazel. A quick flick drew it into a reverse grip. Salem's got you killing kids now, does she? His head turned as he spat upon the sands. Gretchen would be so disappointed in you. That, at least, seemed to give the giant pause, if only for a moment. Don't say her name. I'll say whatever I want. A spark of anger burned through his stony facade. I've already failed to save one maiden this week. I'm not going to fail another. You will. No, I don't think so. Those eyes didn't burn with flames, but they were bright all the same as he cracked his knuckles. I had to run all the way over from Mistral to get here. Mistral. His teeth clenched, biting off a snarl. And then shade after that lightning strike. Do you have any idea how much energy that took? I had to burn half my reserves just to get here in time. You fool, that giant wheezed a little, cradling the grievous wound left in his chest. You can't stop me, you're a clone. The blonde PP his head like a wary fox. Figure that out yourself, did you? I have. The real you would have finished me by now. You're just a clone, yet you truly think you can defeat me as you are. Foolish. Another dust crystal came and went, causing his muscles to bulge anew. Compared to the original, you're nothing. You're alone, tired. No one can help you. Arslan struggled to rise, but her legs failed her. Be careful. His semblance ... he can't feel any pain. I know. The man with the heart of stone spread his arms on either side of him, palms splayed. Hazel and I are old friends, and it's fine. The blonde tilted his head. I don't need any help. After all, Hazel, a slow, lazy smile spread across his face. You're weak. The giant stiffened and abandoned his attack. Indeed, poor Hazel's world ground a halt in an instant. Weak. His very soul bridled at the slight. He wasn't weak. Not anymore. He'd sold his soul for vengeance. This was for Gretchen. These fools were fighting a losing war, fighting to watch this world die. So they had to go, all of them. Salem would bring about a pure world, a world where children like Gretchen never died. He would gladly fight to see such a world. In his mind, that didn't make him weak. That made him strong. You dare. An open palm cracked across his face, snapping his head to one side. He rode the blow and pivoted, only for a second to rock his world. This was madness. He was no slouch when it came to strength. Even now, he had at least 2 dust crystals crackling through his body. And he was losing. That insult, still so fresh in his mind, burned Hazel's fury to new heights. You're weak. Step by step, Naruto struck him, drove him back. I fought a god. Compared to that, my friend ... even a clone like me can beat you. He swung up. Sand burst before Hazel's face, blinding him to the roundhouse that followed. You're just a man. A fist caught him by the ankle and slammed him into the sands. Once, twice, thrice. Puny Hazel. His mind snapped. I'll kill you. He slammed into the blonde's unprotected flank and tackled him to the dunes. Massive knuckles descended on the blonde's forearms as he protected himself. Once, twice, thrice. On the 4th, Naruto caught his first. Bitter blue eyes gazed up at him, flecked with shards of gold ... in disappointment. Hazel rammed another arm down, only to find that entrapped as well. An angry growl tore out of the monster masquerading as a man beneath him, a noise that had no business coming from a man's throat. Better men than you have tried. His head snapped forward, obliterating Hazel's nose. No more. Excuse me. I said no more. Not one more. Blue eyes pulsed gold. In his mind's eye, Hazel Raynard glimpsed a giant red orb, and a snarling beast with it. Something yanked his consciousness elsewhere. Great gnashing jaws snapped at him, not real, yet deadly all the same. He blinked and yet the illusion remained. Terror became reality. An uppercut caught Hazel by the chin. Teeth whistled away through the air. He saw the next attack coming and tried to block. He really, truly did. He just wasn't fast enough. Clenched knuckles barreled into his jaw to send him flying. Hazel struck the floor and went sprawling, aura crackling across his body. His semblance went with it. Pain came crashing back. He choked on it. When he tried to rise, someone kicked him back down again. Too late, he realized his blunder and tried to correct it. Golden light filled his vision. The giant didn't stand a chance. I have had it up to here with Vacuo. A fist shot forward, bloodying Hazel's nose anew. It's too hot. The giant lunged at him with a clenched fist, only for a clawed hand to obliterate his right eye. There's too much sand. His adversary kicked out, obliterating the giant's knee. Don't even get me started about the storms. Hazel slammed down to one leg and promptly lost it as a glowing red claw hacked it away at the knee. I am sick of it all, sick of this, and sick of you. Raynard crashed back, clutching at his mangled limb, to no avail. And I'm sick of you lot killing children. Not one more. The red demon showed no mercy. None at all. No more, Hazel. Wham! BLD spattered the sands. Do you hear me? A fish scythed out, tearing, smashing through his guard to crack the murderer's skull. It ends tonight. You've taken your last life. His boot crashed down and the giant slumped, bleeding from an ugly wound in his skull. Arslan sank to her knees at the sight. ... as he did. Her savior turned a weather eye back to the still twitching body behind him. No one could survive that. No one. Either the elements would take him or the BLDLUs would. Somehow there wasn't enough for it. Not enough that he had been battered and beaten within an inch of his life. No, not nearly enough. And then her savior spoke. Take your revenge. ... What? The battered girl blinked. He killed your family, didn't he? He stepped aside. He owes you a debt of BLD. End him, or I will. Anger reared its ugly head and became hate. Hazel tried to struggle upright. His good eye met hers, nearly swollen shut. What right did he have to live? Why was he still here when her family wasn't? Not fair. Absolutely unfair. Arslan felt her gaze flash with green fire. Her hand rose. Lightning leaped from her fingers and a thunderbolt slammed into Hazel from on high, sending sparks skittering over his prone form like so much spellfire. His body jumped once, and a pain groan fled from his lips. So she hit him again. He cried out once more. Again, and again, yet again. Her eyes burned. Her throat closed around a scream. Until only ashes remained. She blasted those too, just to be sure. Naruto clapped her on the shoulder. Good girl. He won't be coming back from that. Arslan sniffled. I did good. Yup. In that moment, Uzumaki reminded her of Papa. His hair was the same color, all that BLD made his skin look dark, and his smile was just the same. Strong and flinty, with a core of warmth beneath. It was too much. Her mind broke. Her knees buckled and she slumped to the sands, sprawling unevenly among the dunes. Her eyes began to burn. She sniffled again. The shadow clone swore softly. Somehow that made it worse. Tears ran down her face, then that was the end of it. She threw her head back and bawled like the little girl she was. Naruto's shadow clone sat down beside her. He didn't say anything when she latched onto him. He just sat there. And from that singular event ... well, the fate of Remnant changed that much more. The girl writhed beneath the throne, screaming as she clutched at her ruined limb. Amber SCK in a ragged breath. I won't ... fail again. Salem smiled upon her. We shall see. Neo reached beacon unimpeded. No crazed Grimm, no terrorist attack, not even a stiff breeze to impede their flight. Honestly, it was a little boring. She felt restless, anxious. Perhaps it was wrong of her to crave excitement after little vacation, yet crave it she did. Young was nice and all, but she'd felt herself going crazy in that house. And really, who did that crazy blonde girl think her old man was better than Naruto? Really, someone needed to teach her a lesson. Neo certainly wasn't much a fan of bullheads to begin with. Heights really didn't agree with her. And the silence of her parents certainly didn't help matters any. Naruto and Summer had barely spoken to her since their little craft took off, and while they admittedly had reasons for that, she wasn't much pleased at being ignored. It wasn't fair when others stole the spotlight. She was supposed to be the heroine of this story ... wasn't she? Right. Naruto pinched the brow of his nose as he spoke into his scroll. No, take your time. Meet up with each other if you can. Right. Be safe. The mute maiden watched her protector most intently as he hung the phone. For a moment sounded like he was talking to himself. Crazy, that. People didn't talk to themselves. Right. Certainly not. Oh, silly Neo. How little she knew. One of your clones, I take it. Summer quirked a brow where she sat beside him. Did they find something? Someone, more like. He grimaced, absently stroking Neo's head. Mistral was a bust, but Atlas in vacuo. A tan hand scratched the back of his own scalp. Well, let's just say the family might be getting a bit bigger in the near future. Summer's brow nearly shot into her hairline. Oh, family. Neo rather liked the idea of a big family. The more the merrier. A little sister sounded really nice. Look over there, sweetie. Summer guided her gaze out a porthole. We're nearly here. You don't want to miss this sight. In no time at all, the grand spires loomed before them in all their silent splendor. All the while, Neo watched with veiled interest. This place would be her home, they said. She would be trained here, learn to MSTR her gifts and more. When her enemies came for her again, she would be able to defend herself against them. Really, it was something to be happy about, wasn't it? So why did she feel so nervous? The landing proved just as uneventful as the flight, until she saw a man awaiting them on the landing pad. Dark clothes, green scar, silver hair and a cane. She didn't like him from the first. Wrestling her fears down, she nevertheless waited for the bay doors to open before she dared move. Even then she was quick to hide behind Summer's cloak. Like any gentleman, the stranger met them as they descended the ramp. Perfunctory greetings were exchanged, words she barely paid heed to. In no time at all, his gaze focused on her. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, little maiden. Ospen offered his hand. Neo flinched. No trust. People had tried to win her trust before. Mama and Papa were the exception. Everyone else were to be wary of. Perhaps that wasn't the best grammar on her part, but she didn't care. She was a child after all, and Ospen was so very tall, and a stranger at that. Really, she couldn't be blamed for her reaction when she saw his hand reach for her. Panicked, Neo reared back, baring her teeth. As she bit down strong. Naruto slapped his forehead. Summer howled with laughter. Like mother, like daughter it seemed. This was the life. Warmth, check. Food in her belly, double check. All the love and affection a mute child could ever want. Triple check. Squeaky clean. Ike. Neo wasn't much a fan of that last bit, just as all children loathed all things associated with baths, but 3 out of 4 wasn't bad. Really, all that awful scrubbing and cleaning had been horrid. Dirt was good. Nobody paid any attention to you when you were dirty. Why did everyone in Vale have to be so clean? Hopefully she wouldn't be needing another bath anytime soon. Content in her small victory, Neo snuggled deeper into her blanks with a silent sigh. Cocooned in a shell of warmth on the sofa, she took a long moment to simply bask in it all. This was bliss. After spending so many days on the run, scraping and scrounging just to survive, she was safe. Old habits died strong, but she refused to give in to them. No, she was safe here. She could finally kick back and relax for the first time in ... well, forever. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been able to do something like this. To just live without fear. This was a good place. No lunatics out for her BLD, no Grimm trying to gobble her up, just ... what was the word? Mama had said it only a few minutes ago. Peace. Yes, that was the word. Neo wrinkled her nose and considered her surroundings. Yup, it was official. There could be no greater peace than this. Spying her prize on a nearby table, she wriggled her arms from beneath the blankets and darted forward to claim it. Pale hands caught and cradled a cup of hot cocoa, letting the warm mug melt away the evening chill like a bad dream. Its faint aroma caressed her nose like a teasing breeze while she sipped at it. The ghost of a smile touched her face as it warmed her spirits. Bliss. The only thing that could make this even better would be. There. Comfortable, are we? Leo's head bobbed in a pleased nod, mismatching eyes half-lidded with glee as Summer took the now empty mug from her hands and plonked down on the cushion beside her. No sooner had she done so than the little maiden latched onto her. The huntress chortled a little, but made no move to extricate herself. A soft hand stroked the back of her head in smooth, circular motions. Good girl. Naruto claimed the rightmost space beside her, effectively sandwiching Neo between the two of them. She pivoted and took the opportunity to burrow into his side as well. Summer smiled indulgently. You're a cuddler, just like young. Neo tossed her head with a huff. She took offense to that slanderous statement. She was nothing like that surly blonde. Come on, don't tease her. The low drawl of Papa's voice broke through her musings. Kids had a long day. Neo glowered at him, and he amended his statement. Long week, really. Neo agreed wholeheartedly. The man with the cane had put her through so many tests. He kept prattling on and on about training and duty and other big words she couldn't be bothered to understand. She didn't much care for them, either. So what if she had an odd power? This was her home. Her home, forever and ever and ever. She wouldn't give this up for the world. Neo's gaze strayed to Summer as she devoured her meal and chased it down with a glass of juice. Not wine, juice. She'd stopped drinking it days ago. Papa had noticed too, or maybe he only noticed now, because he was looking at her strangely. When Neo leaned forward, he mirrored her. You've been awfully hungry lately. Summer stilled, the sandwich hovering before her mouth. It's nothing. Beside them, Neo tilted her head. Some began to sweat. I'm fine, really. Summer. To be fair, the huntress tried to bolt. She just wasn't quick enough. Neo got a hold of her arm and turned pleading eyes on her mother figure. Was she sick? She couldn't be sick. No, not allowed. That was enough to slow her, time enough for Naruto to move and sit on the opposite side of Summer. Just like that, the silver-eyed warrior found herself hemmed in between the two of them. Beneath their combined stare, Summer faltered. I'm late, she mumbled. Her face went red. Naruto blinked. Late for what? Summer's chin embraced her chest. Why do you think? I don't know. The man with the heart of stone quirked a brow. That's why I'm asking you. Summer all but rounded on him. Do I have to spell it out for you? Another blink followed the first. Yes, please. Aorg. She made a keening noise through her teeth. It reminded Neo of stem escaping a kettle. Before her very eyes, Summer shifted and settled a hand on her stomach, almost as if she were protecting it. Now it was Neo's turn to blink. Realization broke like the dawn. She admittedly knew little of the world, but she knew enough. A sibling. Already. She rather liked the sound of that. Her body twisted and she clung ever more tightly to her. Well, Summer unbent enough to pat her head. At least someone's taking this well. Neo stole a look at Naruto. His face was curiously blank. Oh, dear. A hand waved before his face. No response came. Had they broken him? And of course she was taking this well. She'd have a minion to boss around. Come to think of it, she'd always wanted a big family. The more minions, the merrier. Still, she couldn't quite ignore the feather of fear that tickled her heart. They wouldn't try to replace her, surely. No, they wouldn't do that. Not ever. None would usurp her place as first. She wouldn't let them. Never. Well, here we are. Weiss managed a weak nod as she traipsed to a halt beside him. They'd made it safely. She could put aside her rage, her grief, her burning need for vengeance ... for now. It still burned in her chest, but it was a cold burn, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. The little Schnee held it tight, even as her eyes flashed with pale blue flames. We're finally here. This is it. Naruto's clone exhaled in a world-weary sigh. Home sweet home. Sorry it took so long. At a glance she didn't think much of this place, if only because she couldn't. She was too afraid to grow attached to anything other than the man who had saved her life. And besides, the abode of Summer Rose truly left much to be desired. It was a cozy little collage to be sure, nothing out of the ordinary. She could see a fireplace burning merrily through one of the windows. Winter would have liked it, she thought. Winter, who still hadn't stirred, who seemed weaker every day now, as if she'd simply lost the will to live. She looked so frail, so thin. Was that Tyrian's poison at work, or something more sinister? If Winter died ... she would be alone in this world for real. The last Schnee, cursed with a power she'd never wanted, never asked for, never needed. No. She wrenched her mind away. Don't think like that. Winter will live. She has to. Still, Naruto, or rather, his shadow clone, had proven instrumental in smuggling them out of Atlas' safety. For that she owed him her trust, if not her life. It had been a strong journey, a long one indeed, but here at last she saw the end of the road. No more sleeping on the road or in shoddy tents. No more standing idly by as Winter's breathing grew weaker and weaker. No more field rations or ghastly travel fare. Beds, warmth, comfort, anything that might distract her formed the specter of death hanging over her sister. The distant rustle of a parting bush caught her ears. She rounded on it, expecting another ambush. Thus, she was quite surprised when someone wearing Naruto's face emerged from the opposite end of the clearing. He was carrying a girl on his back. Unlike her copy, he looked rather tired. Exhausted, even. His eyes grew wide at the sight of her. Weiss shrank back. And who are you? She demanded of that chaperone. I could ask you the same. The girl absolutely glowered at her from her perch on his back, gaze ablaze. What are you doing here? She felt the air shift between them, stirring with a power she recognized. One so like her own. Burning eyes met flaming orbs. You're like me. The blonde bridled. No, you're like me. Nuh-uh. Yeah, huh. The door creaked open before they could come to blows. What's all this now? A woman moved her head out, shirt askew and silver eyes narrow. Do you have any idea how late it is? Then she saw them. Silver eyes grew very large indeed. Oh, a startled blink bled her anger away. One hand came up to cover her mouth. Aren't you dears just adorable? Come in, come in. She craned her neck back and shouted inside, Naruto. Neo, they're here. A dull thud answered, accompanied by rapid footsteps. Not a moment later, a young girl moved herself between the woman's legs. Her eyes, too, were alight with flame. She took one look at them and flashed a jaunty little wave, but it was the man behind her that truly caught their eyes. Well, the original considered them for a long, pointed moment. What are you standing there for? Food's getting cold. Without so much as a backward glance, he pivoted and stalked back inside. Well, that was brusque. Weiss exchanged a resigned look with Arslan. The blonde girl shrugged helplessly. Together, they set aside their grudge and sallied forth into the unknown. Just like that, their fate shifted that much more. The tribe had finally stopped beating the girl. She knew it if only because everything had stopped spinning. Her body lay sprawled out in the dirt, her clothing reduced to little more than bloody rags. Her ears rang and her body ached in the worst of ways, but at least they weren't hurting her anymore. She took some small solace in that. They'd been lenient today. Perhaps they might even feed her. Unlikely. They hadn't fed her for quite some time now. Her stomach, already treacherously thin, groaned plaintively at the thought. So weak, so tired. There had been a time when she craved vengeance for what had been done to her, justice for the wrongs visited upon her and her kin. That had been months ago. Now she wanted to close her eyes and never open them again. Surely that would be better than this. To die meant she could be with her parents again, away from here, away from the bandits, away from all of it. And as she lay there, she heard her would-be killers discuss her fate. Who's the kid? We got a name? Yet. Not sure. She won't talk. Hasn't said a word. She wouldn't. And she hadn't. Even after all this, she refused to give them the satisfaction of her screams. They could torture her all they wished. She'd not make a sound even if she heard their screams in her dreams. A small comfort perhaps, but it was hers. Imagining their deaths gave her strength in her darkest moments. Her ruined face twitched in a small smile. Shicky brat. The bandits didn't like that. One of them kicked her in the face. Teeth whistled through the air and clattered to the dirt. Do you longing power, child? A dark voice, a woman's voice whispered in her ear. I could free you from this. You have but to say the word. Was she imagining things, hallucinating in her final moments? Who? Do you seek power? Do you crave justice for what has been done to you? An ember ignited in her scarred chest. Yes, more than anything. With a start, she realized she hadn't given up after all. She wanted to live. No, more than that. She wanted to thrive. She wanted to show the world that she was something, that she was someone. Not some urchin to be taken from her village and ground underfoot, to be branded and beaten every day. Even the dogs were treated better than her. How fortunate. The voice came back again, oozing curiosity. I longing a disciple. The last has proven disappointing. Will you serve? Yes. She croaked the word little more than a whisper. I will serve. Then swear yourself to me. She did. So let it be. Try not to die. Something twisted in the girl's chest. Her soul, what was left of it, screamed in agony. Human eyes blazed red as the whites of her eyes stained themselves black. She curled inward as her chest burned, as a foul and awful corruption took root in her heart of hearts. Fire flooded her veins, reducing her breath to little gasping hitches of pain. It was the work of an instant, and yet it felt like an eternity that she lay there, suffering. With neither word nor warning, the pain abated. Hear me, you who have survived. The voice was her world now, her everything. Know me, I am Salem, and you are mine. Now kill them. Kill them, claim the tribe for yourself, and bring your people to me. There is much to do. Beat her some more. A lead bandit spoke suddenly, snapping the girl back to reality. Might talk the neck. Strong hands latched around him, dragged him down. BLD spattered the earth. My name, their captive growled as she tore out his throat, is Vernal. And this camp. She kicked him down and stomped out his skull. Your tribe, everything you have. This is mine now. The world would be hers. So she swore. I have no idea how to be a father. It took Naruto only a month of parenthood to realize this fundamental truth. There were times when he had such thoughts, rare, brief flashes of realization when he understood just how badly he'd been bamboozled. Make no mistake, he considered himself a capable fellow. He could fight and kill with the best of them, even talk his way out of trouble if things truly grew dire. Yet for all his strength and silver tongue, here he found himself at a loss. How the hell did one raise 3 girls with a 4th on the way? If there was a manual for such a thing, Naruto had yet to find one. Dotted back. A girlish shout pervaded the calming zen of his meditation in the yard. I saw it first. A blonde brow twitched. Ignore it. He was no helicopter parent. Girls would be girls, they were bound to fight every now and again. I will do no such thing you urchin. Come, this mustn't register on an emotional level. There was no anger, no irritation. He felt nothing. After a moment, he calmed himself. He held tight to his heart of stone, his already dampened emotions suppressed to the point of non-existence for a singular moment. He would not be roused by such petty arguments. Summer could handle it. You're such a Schnee. Arslan's angry shout came back. And you're a no-name wretch. It didn't bother him. This did not bother him. It bothered him a lot. His concentration shattered like so much glass, and all the noise of the world in his house snapped back like a rubber band. Blue eyes snapped open. All the precious sage chakra he'd painstakingly gathered burst out at once to stain his eyes a vividly shade of gold. A low growl pierced the yard, laced with the faintest hint of killing intent. Girls, Weiss and Arslan froze before him, fists tangled in one another's hair. Clothes scuffed, eyes ablaze and faces dirty, they looked an absolute mess. Well, Naruto glared at them for a long moment, conveying the full weight of his disappointment with a single look. What do you have to say for yourselves? At length, the little maidens wilted. Children. They were enough to make his head spin. And not just any children, oh no, normal ones were bad enough. But these were maiden children. That added a whole other layer of complexity that he had no idea how to deal with. When tempers ran hot, so too did the elements. He spared a glance for the ruined yard, frowning now when he saw the scorched yet frozen grass. This was his life now. Arslan, use your words, not your fists. And stop that. Quick as a flash he reached down and plucked a knife from her hand before she could stab Weiss for some slight he hadn't heard. Don't stab your sister. She is not my sister. Angry green eyes rounded on him. She was being a beach. Weiss absolutely hissed. Me. If anyone's a beach here, it's clearly you. Summer's head poked out the patio door. Language. The maidens wilted. Sorry. Naruto sighed. Instinct had him pivoting to search for Neo. Sure enough, he found her sprawled out in the grass only a few yards away, watching their squabble with a gleeful expression. She caught him staring and waved. Cheeky little instigator. She always did enjoy setting her siblings against one another. He'd have to punish her later. Maybe take away her ice cream privileges for a day or two. His gaze slid back to the two children before him. Arslan, she squeaked a little under his gaze. Tell me, did you stab people for being rude and vacuo? The younger girl scowled and scuffed a foot in the dirt. Sometimes, right. He stifled a sigh as he climbed to his feet. Survival of the strongest and all that. But that's not how we work here. A gloved hand came down on her shoulder. If you're upset with someone, talk to them. Try to understand them. Don't go stabbing them if they PSS you off. Guileless green eyes blind once. But that's what you do. Despite his best efforts to curtail it, the ghost of a smile touched Naruto's face. No, a lone finger rose. I stab criminals, grimm, and madmen. Entirely different kettle of fish, that. Now, then, I didn't do anything wrong. Weiss bridled as he turned to face her fully. Unlike Arslan, she managed to stand her ground under his gaze, stubborn little Schnee that she was. Naruto PP his head just so, and she made a keening noise through her teeth. She insulted my sister. I'll see her sued for this. Yeah. Arslan leaned around him. You in what army? You're the last Schnee. Just like that, her fury sparked back to life. Take it back. Hoi. Naruto reached down and plucked them both off the grass by the scruff of their necks. Act like this and I won't train you. Either of you. Arslan kicked furiously in the air. But she started it. And I'm ending it. His eyes narrowed upon her. Your actions bring shame to you, Arslan. Apologize. She subsided with a snarl. All right. I'm sorry. Good girl. He set her down with a scowl. Weiss huffed. I'm sorry. Did I say something that you found funny? Naruto pivoted on her, still dangling the small Schnee in the air. I expected better from a noble bloodline of Atlas. His eyes narrowed. What would Winter say if she saw you like this? Would she be proud of you? They got her to clam up. Weiss hunched her little shoulders, and for a moment she seemed terribly small. She took a deep, shuddering breath. You'll keep healing my sister, won't you? Her misery shamed him. That brief spark of anger guttered out, a candle in the wind. In truth, he didn't think there was much more he could do for Winter. He'd healed all her wounds, kept her fed and hydrated using arts not known to man, even repaired the crippling organ failure she'd suffered under Tyrion's twisted poisons. She wasn't degenerating, but she still had yet to open her eyes. The rest was up to her. She had to find the will to live. He couldn't grant her that. Not anymore. Of course. He set Weiss down and drew her in for a quick hug. You know I won't hold that over you. Hey. Arslan wriggled into his arms from the side, all but squishing Weiss against him. Don't forget about me. We've got training to do. Stop it, she hissed. You're crushing me. Naruto sighed. Greedy girls. On a certain level, he knew the universe was probably laughing at him, but there wasn't a diamond thing he could do about it. He might have hardened his heart, but he wasn't cruel. Summer was an absolute godsend in that regard. And also part of the problem. Even now she was letting him hash things out with the girls while she made dinner, because she knew he needed this. A child. By the log, he was going to be a father again. 8 months from now, there would be a baby in this world. Little Ruby Rose. Sometimes it felt like his emotions were beginning to return of their own accord. Bit by brick, the wall he'd built between himself and the world was beginning to crumble. Sometimes he caught himself wondering what he might find on the other side, if he opened his heart and allowed himself to fully feel again. Nothing good could come of that, surely. And then Neo was quite suddenly there, materializing with a freshly inked sign that conveyed her intentions where words could not. I was first. Arslan bridled at the slight. Hey, no fair. Weiss joined her. How rude. Another sign joined the first. Get on my level, new bloods. Neo did a little spin and tittered soundlessly, delighting in the chaos she'd caused. Yes, this was his life, now. Might as well accept it. If he tried to run away, they'd just follow him. What is this? What's happening to me? Blake Belladonna gazed at her reflection in the mirror and tried not to cry. It was an exercise in futility, because her eyes were glowing, spitting living flames. She did what any little girl would do. She called for help. Mommy, Daddy, why am I glowing? The door to her bedroom crashed open. That was all she heard before Gira and Kali swept her into their loving arms. Knock, knock. Naruto looked up as he finished setting the table. Come on, Whiskers. A low voice drawled the door. I know you're in there. Open up already. Summer rolled her eyes and looked away from the stove. Naruto, let him in. Nope. He shook his head once. Don't hear anything. Must be the wind. Weiss and Arslan exchanged a dour look but held their tongues. I'm right here. Their guest sang through the wood. Neo tittered soundlessly. The weary warrior exchanged a rueful look with Summer and tried to ignore her glower. He knew who was waiting for him on the other side of the door. Indeed, he had sensed their approach long before they'd announced their arrival. As such, he didn't want to open it. No, nope, negative. To hell with what Summer said, that door wasn't opening for anyone or anything. He was rather keen on that last bit. Maybe if he ignored them, they'd give up and go away. Yes, that sounded quite nice. Just pretend they weren't there and I know a song that gets on everybody's nerves. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Resist. Naruto Uzumaki. The spatula poked him in the nose. You let Kuro in right now, or so help me, I will break your arm when I have this baby. Oh? The ghost of his smile returned. It brought with friends. And here I thought you'd say no sec. Summer's pale face turned the color of her namesake and she swatted him on the arse as he glided to the door. Almost made him laugh, that did. Neo tried to follow like the silent shadow she was, but he shooed her back toward the table to finish setting the table. She went with a huff. Sassy little thing. He swept the door open. Sure enough, a familiar face awaited him. Kuro. He sighed, forcing a smile he didn't feel. We were just about to sit down for dinner. Did you need something? Sorta. The surly drunk leaned around him before he could inquire further. Hey, SQR. Miss me? One could hear a pin drop in the silence that followed. And then, Naruto knew better. He got the hell out of the way. Uncle QROW. Neo, Arslan and Weiss fell upon him with delighted shrieks or perhaps a lack thereof, for the latter all but bowling the bleary Branwen down in their haste to get at him. Kuro never stood a chance. Then again, he didn't put up much of a fight, either. He went down with a laugh, or a crackling as he smacked his head against the floor. Happy chatter filled the air and for the life of him, he couldn't find it in him to disparage them. Girls would be girls after all. Etch. Kuro flailed his arms, warding them off. Give me some breathing room, brats. He raised both arms. Belatedly, Naruto noticed the multicolored bags and satchels slung over his personage. One was pale blue, the second a striking red gold, while the last looked to be some strange blend of white, brown, and pink. Not much point in guessing at that one. I come bearing gifts. The girls all but clambered off him. All save Neo. She remained planted on his chest. You, huh? He coughed. Gonna move there, kiddo. She shook her head and stared at the bag. What, you want yours now? She nodded quickly. Neo. Summer grabbed their fiery little fairy and swept her under an arm. I'm sorry, she's always like this. Like what? A familiar figure stepped over Kuro's prone form with languid ease. Way I see it, she knows what she wants. That's a good thing. Naruto raised his gaze, only mildly nonplussed to find that Kuro hadn't come alone. There you are, you old devil. See Mir. The wayward warrior recognized Taeyang at once, if only because the big brute couldn't be anyone else. Was he going to ... Yes. Yes, he was. He'd only just raised a hand in a half-hearted greeting when the man swept him into a crushing bear hug. He coughed once and clapped the enthusiastic fellow on the back. Really, it was impossible to smile when he was around. Naruto feigned a smile for his sake. I keep telling you, I'm not that old. They're behind him, pulling up the rear, and looked every bit out of sorts for it ... Well. She was beginning to look rather gravid this far into her PRGNNCY, he supposed, but that was a testament to her new lifestyle. She'd be burning off all that extra weight soon enough. Raven might be many things, but she wasn't the sort to sit around and grow soft. Not too soft, at least. She was clutching a tray of some sort, and there was a rather curious smell coming from it. She saw him and nodded curtly. Fox. He returned it in kind. Hello, Birdie. Another bun in the oven, eh? Her glower was nothing short of legendary. Shame it didn't have an effect on him. Raven. Summer nearly slammed into her side. We weren't expecting you. Silver eyes flitted to her teammate's round belly. Is it safe for you to be out and about like this? Bah. The warrior scoffed. I didn't let one kid stop me, and I'm not about to lose a second. Besides, we brought supplies ... and my brat. They brought food, he realized. Quite a bit of it. Hey, Auntie. Hi, Uncle. Young poked her head around her mother's leg. I came to play. Neo silently hissed. Arslan PP her like a curious cat. Weiss bridled as only a Schnee could. Who is this ruffian? Who am I? Lilac eyes flashed red. I'm the girl who's gonna put some dirt in your eye if you don't cut that CRP out. Arslan grinned. You, I like. Naruto clapped a hand to his forehead. Yes, this madness was undoubtedly his life now. Come on in, he sighed. Make yourselves at home. Unbeknownst to him, another crack etched itself into his heart of stone. It's been some time since we last met. How fare your wounds, Watts? Arthur was many things, but Salem knew he was no fool. He wouldn't have lasted this long in her service if he were. He heard the reproach in her remark and didn't dare rise to the bait. Quite the contrary. He remained in his seat, staring pointedly at the table as her gaze pierced him. Credit where it was due, he only slouched a little ... even if he couldn't stop scratching his left arm. Rather unpleasant, I'm afraid. His mustache bristled with suppressed anger. I underestimated my quarry. It won't happen again. I certainly hope not. She tilted her head to regard the rest of him. There's not much left of you to burn. He seeped in silence. Salem sympathized with his plight. Truly, she did. Fire was fire to be sure, but the flames of a maiden were a different breed. Magic had a mind all its own. Magic was unlike aura. It lingered, even after death. What he once believed to be no more than a mere singing had spread rapidly to cover most of his body. His hair, already thin to begin, was slowly but surely falling out as his skin became more and more inflamed. At this rate he might well lose an eye, or an arm, perhaps both. Salem supposed that was his own fault. Arrogance had been the downfall of many a prideful soul, and the grudge of a maiden was a powerful thing. Mayhaps this would teach him a lesson ... or not. He was useful for now, but said usefulness only extended so far. Tyrion tittered a little. Poor doctor ... does it sting? Silence. Watts slammed a fist down on the table. At least I wasn't bested by that blonde buffoon. That silenced her devotee more than any rebuke. But only for a moment. His grin returned full force a moment later. Well, at least I still have my hair. Watts burst to his feet. At least I'm alive. Enough. Salem temporized with a raised hand. Hazel's death is a loss. I'll not have you disparage him. Really, it was. Gullible fools like him were useful to be sure, but he had been a diamond in the rough. Strong aura, insensible to pain, and with a single-minded hatred of her dear Ozma. And now he was dead, while her former husband no doubt gloated over his ashes. This Naruto was becoming an annoyance. She'd tolerated him for a time, but now he'd spirited not one, not two, but 3 maidens away to parts unknown. She'd tried scrying for them since, to no avail. Hazel was dead by his hand. Tyrion required a new grim tale, and Amber was still recovering after her recent enhancements. She needed time to recover. Furthermore, Arthur wouldn't be much use to her until he healed. If he healed, those burns were eating him from the inside out. If he didn't receive proper medical attention soon, he might not last the month. Useless, the lot of him. Perhaps it was time for a change of course. Still, we must press on. She waved a hand, bidding them to sit. Ozma has found himself a rather capable pawn, but he has failed to find the last maiden. He won't. Tyrion's new tail swayed behind him as he tittered. Not if I have anything to say about it. Oh, I very much doubt that, but you'll make a useful distraction. Spring yet remains, she said instead. We must secure her. Vacuo and Vale have already been searched. We know the Winter Maiden was spirited away from Atlas, and Mistral's Maiden is dead. Watts snarled, touching a hand to his ruined face. Who knows where her power went? Salem leaned back in her throne. Menagerie. Both men blinked. Arthur found his voice first. That's impossible. How could you know that? Tyrion turned a scowl upon him. Are you questioning our divine savior? Salem's gaze fixed upon Watts wilted. No, he looked away with a harried mutter. Of course not. I have been scrying for some time now. She didn't deign to explain further than that. She recently awakened to her power there. In truth, she'd done nothing of the sort. No, her source was far more mundane. Such a useful little spy she had on that island. Best not to reveal them for now. Arthur and Tyrion could be so very overzealous. The matter is well in hand. True to his nature, Tyrion leapt at the chance to prove himself. Your Grace, allow me to. No, the two of you will stay here and recover. I'll be sending an agent to Patch. As for Menagerie, well, that was easily remedied. Jealousy might well foster competition, but Salem had no longing for such. No patience for it. Instead, she turned her gaze past her throne and into the shadows, where the final member of her entourage lurked. They'd not spoken a word. Her lieutenants followed her line of sight. Arthur recoiled. Just a bit. Just a touch. Just enough to be seen. Even now he feared her newest ally, nor did he understand why this one hid their face. They dreaded its presence all the same. As well they should. Mankind feared that which it did not understand. She uttered but 4 words to them. Bring her to me. The shadowy figure granted her a curt nod. It will be done. Light couldn't breathe. She tried to. She really, truly did, but she just couldn't. All the world pressed down around her like a wet blanket, smothering her where she stood. It felt like a vice was squeezing her head, one that tightened with each passing moment. She clawed at her skull, whimpering softly as her eyes burned with fresh golden flame. Make it stop. She wanted it to stop. Someone, make it stop. She didn't want this. She didn't like it. Didn't need it. Distantly she heard her parents rush into the room, felt them embrace her, arms tight around her as she screamed. But the pain wouldn't stop. Something was burning in her chest and in her heart and in her head. It felt awful and wonderful at the same time, and her head was going to explode. And then, quite suddenly, she could breathe again. Gah! Blake SCK in a ragged breath, air coming in tiny hitching gasps as she came back to herself. Her body curled into a ball. What's happening to me? Mommy and Daddy held her close. So close that she heard them, even when they whispered. It's happening again, isn't it? That sounded like Mommy. Blake felt Daddy sigh against her. I need to make a call. Gira Belladonna was a fine father. Some might even say he was an excellent one in that he put family before everything else. Beyond pride, honor, even his very life. From the moment he saw his daughter's glowing eyes, he knew what must be done, even as it killed his heart to do it. For he had witnessed this once before, just as he'd seen the foul fate that befell the last woman with burning eyes. That day, he stood by and let fate take its course. Not today, not with his daughter. And so he made the call. In the dead of night, Ospen startled awake behind his desk when his scroll rang. His mind snapped to immediately as he thrashed awake, drawn from the depths of dark dreams back to the present. He prided himself on keeping an open channel with the leaders of the other kingdoms. Menagerie might not yet host a huntsman academy, but he hoped someday it might. To that end, he'd work to cultivate a working relationship with those in charge. More aptly, their acting chieftain. Gira, his voice slurred only a little from sleep. What can I do for you? A pause. Yes, I see. I'll call him. Rest assured, she'll be in good hands. Naruto was going to kill him for this. Someone was calling him. Naruto rolled over in bed and clawed at the end table with a snarl. Fumbling fingers found his scroll and slapped at it until it went silent. It sprang back to life a moment later. He slammed a fist down on it again, just to be certain. Only then did he finally creak a blue eye open to regard the blurry shape of the ceiling above. Dark, his bleary mind babbled. No sunrise. Sleep. With a low groan, he rolled over into Summer and pulled her close. For a brief singular moment he luxuriated in more pleasant things like the little noise she made as she nestled into him, the feel of her bare body pressing into his, the way her curves fit seamlessly against him, and her arms even now wrapping tight round his back. Screw his scroll. It could wait until sunrise. He was just beginning to drift off when he felt her stir. Naruto, HRR. He growled less than eloquently. Are you awake? Against his better judgment, the man with a heart of stone opened his eyes. Half-lidded silver orbs gazed up at him, glowing faintly in the dark. He felt her lay an embrace on his chin. After that there really wasn't any hope of falling back asleep. Blast it all. I am now. Morning. Her mouth met his in a chaste embrace. Ruby says the same. He scoffed a little at that. It's too early for her to start kicking, you know. Not that, silly. She swatted him on the flank, though I'm looking forward to that bit. What was she on about this time? She wasn't making any sense. Naruto wrinkled his nose, not quite comprehending. Why do you mean, then? I saw her in my dreams again. There was something about the way in which she said those words, the certainty behind them, that gave him pause. She can't wait to see you. Now that made more sense. Your semblance again. MMHMM. She laid an embrace on his chest. It's usually annoying, but this isn't so bad. Summer's semblance was a strange one. In a way it reminded Naruto of a watered-down Sharingan, in that allowed her to peer into the future. She couldn't control it. Sometimes it simply happened. She see minutes or days ahead, even years at a time. On occasion it even translated to her dreams. She'd make a prediction, and more often than not, it came true. Thankfully it didn't come with any other esoteric abilities, else he might have been worried. I wish you could see her, Naruto. Her voice tugged him back to reality, bringing with it the warm caress of her hands. She's such a strong girl, everything we could ever hope for. There was a fervor in her voice now, a note of proud parental glee that only a new mother could possibly possess. I spoke with her. She said we're going to win. Win what? Her body pushed against his as she crawled into his lap. The war against Salem, silly. Then she began to move. He gasped a little when she quickened her pace atop him, teasing him with the movement of her hips. It wasn't enough to distract him. Right. Blue eyes rolled. Don't put too much stock in dreams or vision. The future is never set in stone. Maybe not, she admitted, but I'll keep my sweet dreams, thank you very much. A sudden clamor down the hall caught his ear. Summer must have heard it too, for she rolled off him down and nestled her head against his chest. Naruto stifled a groan. Such a tease. Summer yawned beside him. The girls are awake. He buried his head in a pillow over with a groan. Before sunrise, they're your girls. His scroll vibrated anew atop the table, prompting him to glance at Melons. Sure enough, the caller ID didn't surprise him. Ospen, Summer sighed. Aren't you going to pick up? After that cheeky BSDRD woke him. No, he can leave a voicemail. Another crash now, louder than the last. He heard voice raised in an argument. I'll check in on Neo and Arslan. She tugged on her underwear, threw on a nearly translucent gown, and walked away. There was an extra sway in her hips that had his eyes lingering longer than they should have. Bad. She caught him staring and gave her rear a little shake, curves undulating before his eyes. Get up and get dressed. A shrill scream pierced their home, cutting them off. It came from Winter's room. Winter opened her eyes, slowly at first, little more than a twitch, but with growing strength, so too did she begin to move. It was all Weiss had ever hoped for, all she'd ever dreamed of since they'd left Atlas behind. Finally, at last, she was awake. Winter sat up slowly at her gentle prodding. Blinked, once, twice, thrice, her neck craned back to regard her. Blank, glassy orbs regarded Weiss with confusion. Framed in the faint light of the lamp, she could see the dark bags beneath her eyes, the exhaustion lurking within. She blinked again, frowned. Winter, pale hands clamped down around her throat to choke her. Who the hell are you? Weiss screamed. Someone shook her awake from the nightmare. Wake up. It's just a dream. Weiss thrashed her away awake like a hellcat, all but leaping out of the sheets in her haste to escape her nightmare. She kept fighting even as strong arms settled around her. Eyes burning with pale blue fire, she went absolutely berserk, scratching and clawing, biting and swearing. It took her the better part of a minute to calm down. "You're okay." His hand settled on her shoulders, stilling her hammering heart. "Breathe. Just breathe." Her chin came down on his shoulder and she held tight. "Naruto." Weiss heard him grunt in mild annoyance. "You're all right. You can stop trying to make a popsicle of me now." The little maiden blinked, realizing she'd frozen the better part of his left arm in her madness. "She tried to kill me," she babbled. "My own sister. That wasn't here. It was just a bad dream." Blinking terrified tears from her eyes, she held tight and squinted against the darkness. Someone had turned on a lamp, allowing for faint lines of light to trail the room. She cast a furtive glance about, struggling to make sense of it all. Sure enough, Winter lay in her cot, still as the grave. Weiss blinked. "Wait, what was that?" Frowned. Blinked again now. There was someone in the window beside her, looming over her sibling like death itself. Her heart skipped a beat and she scrubbed at her eyes, but no, it was still there. A dark shape, far too tall to be human, bent at horrid angle. A dull crackle of lightning echoed outside, illuminating its body for all of an instant. Slavering jaws parted wide. There was something clenched in its hands. Fear lodged in her throat, but only for a moment. Then she screamed. "Behind you!" Naruto whirled, shielding her with his body, and their world erupted into a torrent of scalding napalm. Naruto awoke with a start. Ears ringing, pain howling through his shoulder, eyes stinging in the dark. He nevertheless grit his teeth and tried to rise. He couldn't, because something held him back, pinned him down. A bruised blue eye flicked up and saw the heavy concrete wedged against his spine. He could feel it stabbing into his body, grating against muscle and bone, all but skewering him. A grimace tore across his whiskered visage. He remembered fire, an explosion, flinging himself over it to protect Weiss and Winter. A blinding spasm of pain passed through him. They were on the ground floor, which meant the roof must have caved in from the blast. A lesser man might have wept. Homes could be rebuilt. Family could not. Summer would be all right. She had aura. He grit his teeth as he dragged an arm out from this wouldn't stop him. A little impalement would hardly keep him down. Where was everyone? He cast a glance about and immediately regretted it. Lights flickered overhead. Flames crackled. The faint smell of a broken gas line reached his nose. All around him the bedroom lay in a hazy ruin. He could see Winter's limp arm buried under a pile of rubble. Weiss wasn't far, her small form pinned by a door. Summer wasn't much further, her body sprawled out over Neo and Arslan's prone forms. Neither moved. Naruto SCK in a ragged rasp of a gasp. His forehead embraced the floor in despair. A lone tear rolled out of his undamaged eye. No. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Not again. Take the girls. An inhuman voice intoned near the hazy doorway. Kill the rest. Kill them. Movement in his peripherals snapped him back to reality. Weiss whimpered where she lay. The sound reactivated him, made a faint keening noise that tore at the heartstrings. Even in unconsciousness, she cried out in pain. Even with her eyes squeezed shut, she sobbed softly. In the same instant, Neo shifted under Summer, her little face wrought with pain. Summer muttered something less than pleasant and raised her gaze, tucking a stunned Arslan into her side. Only then did he see the BLD on them. None of them were in any shape to fight. Another crack etched into Naruto's heart of stone to join the others. This fracture became a fissure, a deep canyon bubbling with rage. His mind fell into it. Everything bled into oblivion, turning all the world a rich rose red. Blue eyes flashed into 9 shades of smoldering scarlet. He planted his good arm on the ground, levered himself up on an elbow, and pushed. Move. Damn it all. He heard the footsteps creeping closer. Just move. Slowly, gradually, the rubble gave way to him. Naruto Uzumaki screamed. A scarlet eye creaked open in the dark. Salem felt the surge of energy. And so it begins. Ospen saw fire on the horizon. His eyes widened. No, kill them. Eager to obey his MSDR, a man rushed into the haze. Something roared in the dark and his body sailed back out in 3 pieces. Naruto stalked through the smoke-filled doorway after him. Tan hands clenched into clawed fists at his sides, swaying loosely with every step. No words were given. No taunts made. No offers of peace extended. He simply advanced. Nothing more, nothing less. His mangled arm set itself with an awful pop, dislocated shoulder withing snapping. Back into place of its own accord. Matted blonde hair hung over his eyes, shading them from view, hiding whatever dark intent might have lurked within. Not so his clenched teeth. His assailants shrank back at the sight of his snarl, utterly unnerved. He's just one man, brothers. Distantly, he heard someone shout. What can one man possibly do against Gak? He never finished those words. The world blurred. A palm closed around his throat. Squeezed. BLD spattered across the yard. His prey died with a gurgle. Naruto's head rose slowly, turned now, right hand still clutching the now crimson cadaver of the zealot. Blue eyes boiled a wild, baleful red as he counted those remaining. 3, 6, 9, 12. They were, all of them, wearing strange white masks. Made it feel less personal, somehow. Their numbers weren't anywhere near enough. They could send an army, and it still wouldn't be enough. His eyes spied movement near the back, the strange black beast from before. It lurked behind them, using the assailants as a shield. An awful ember of confusion flickered in the icy plane of his anger. Why was a grimm working with humans? It didn't make a lick of sense. It saw him and growled. A low rumble pierced the gloom. Take ... the girls ... kill the rest. His brow turned thunderous. ... You should have stayed dead. An ugly chortle answered him. Take ... the ... girls ... You heard it. Kill him and take the kids. One of them, a big bruiser of a man, lunged at him with such a cry. Naruto read him at a glance and moved accordingly. Slow, clumsy, not a threat. A simple backhand tore his head clean off. His body slumped to the ground. Another charged in to avenge them. He caught their punch on his shoulder, surged up, and wrapped his limb around it. Then he drew them in. Bones creaked ominously under his grip. His fist drew back. A low roar tore out of him as he slammed a fist into their torso. Once, twice, now. His victim gasped in pain, reeling in his grasp. A third punch blew clean through the man's chest entirely, leaving a fist-shaped hole in its wake. He dropped like a sack of potatoes, only for Naruto to catch his falling body by the arm and WHP him into another. His assailant became little more than a red mist and the corpse with him, leaving him brandishing a mangled arm. He drove it through another's stomach, leaving them a shrieking wreck. Someone grabbed him by the shoulder, trying to spin him around. He fed them a racing in for their trouble. Everything descended into a mad whirl of melee after that. There was no longer any rhyme to reason for it. The masked men flung themselves at him in droves and died for it. They died badly. He ripped and tore without hesitation, without mercy, without honor. This was no brawl, no duel, not even a fight. ... It was slaughter, pure and simple. He was the butcher and they were so much meat. Red ran across the grove. Screams and shrieks filled the night. But he didn't stop. He daren't stop. All the while he kept his eye on that beast in the back, expecting it to slink off into the house when it wasn't looking. It tried. Once, a flash of silver light from their ruined home summer sent it stumbling back. Naruto raged anew at the sight. You come into my home. A vicious backhand sent another sprawling. Try to lay hands on my girls. No more. His hand closed around their face and squeezed. Their skull pulped like an overripe grape. Not one more. Something stabbed into his back. A steely point moved through his chest, causing him to lurch forward. The sword. In his rage he didn't feel it at first. He reached around and crushed the one responsible. By the time he comprehended the ain he'd nearly healed, red light bubbled up from him, twisting his expression into something furious. He tore the cold steel free, opening the wound again. Didn't care. He used the long blade to spit 3 men like a roast pig and nailed them to a tree. The rest cowered before him. One actually had the gall to beg. He didn't listen. They died screaming to a man. Only then did he face the hound. It stepped over their corpses, utterly unafraid. Take ... the girl. Naruto surged forward to meet the abomination with a wordless roar. They closed on one another in a whirl of claw and fang. Everything blurred after that. Naruto screamed. He screamed for sadness, for sorrow, for wrath and ... hate. He shouted as he tore the hound limb from limb, howled when he ripped off its head, roared while he cast it to the ground, stomped down, and stove in its chest. Bone burst. Black tar boiled beneath the sheer heat of his cloak. He ripped it apart and spat at its remains, leaving nothing behind. And yet, for all his rage, the hound did not die. Take ... the girls. Take. For all his fury, ripping it apart only made the beast all the more numerous. Every piece he annihilated spawned yet more of the hideous abomination. What had been 1 became 2, followed by 3, 4, 5. They laughed at him for his foolishness, lashing into him with singular fury. Fury he reciprocated. A clawed hand tore out his eye. It regenerated instantly. He cut one in twine at the waist and used its ruined halves to bludgeon its siblings. A 6th began to grow from its remains. And as they grew, so did his tails. He couldn't control himself anymore. All the emotion he'd worked so strong to suppress came boiling out. Rip and tear. It was the only way. He was well past 2 now, a trio of transparent scarlet tethers weaving behind him as he raged back and forth across the clearing. 3 tails of crimson wrath boiled behind him. A 4th was already forming. He couldn't stop. He didn't dare stop. To relent for even a moment was to let them through, let them take Summer and the girls ... Even now he could feel them fading. Their lives bleeding away. Yet to go any further, he'd risk losing himself completely. His psyche was slipping, falling further and further into the black. 3 of the hounds bounded at him, uncaring for their safety. He caught one by the chest and rammed it down. Its siblings tackled him before he could finish the job. Claws tore at him, biting through his cloak. He kicked out and flung them away with his tails. Laughter chased him as they slipped back into the black. Not again. I can't. He grit his teeth as his face began to burn, revealing red light beneath. I won't become that thing. I refuse. He fumbled for his scroll with a trembling hand, even as his fingers burned red, mind ebbing away more and more with each moment. Had to call. Needed to call. The plastic began to melt in his grasp almost immediately, but he flailed at it nonetheless, cracking the scree. Against all odds, it connected it. Someone picked up instantly. A bleary snarl answered. Do you have any idea what time it is? Hero. The word was a snarl, forced through clenched teeth. House. No. Use Raven. Claws flashed in the gloom. Instinct shrieked a warning and Naruto ducked low. He wasn't the target. His phone was. It fell from his grasp with a squeal of electronics, taking a finger alongside. His hand regenerated all too quickly. Alas, the ruined device did not. Baleful red eyes narrowed. Why, you little failure. One of the hounds laughed at him, dodging back before he could claw it apart. Failure of a father. In hindsight, he should have realized the danger. They were talking more now. Adapting, changing, evolving. The longer this dragged on, the more intelligent they became. But he didn't hear any of it. That last insult was the straw that broke the camel's back. Naruto's temper sparked anew and the scroll's remains crumbled in his fist. No failure. Not again. Never again. He tried to hold back, tried to clutch at his face, cling to a final thread of sanity. Just couldn't. A low yowl built in the back of Naruto's throat, building with each passing moment. The last of his humanity fled before it. After so many years, he never felt the change. He seldom did anymore. His control slipped for a sliver of a second. That was all it took. The last of his skin burned away as the shroud overtook him, taking his mind with that singular scream. The fourth tail formed with a vengeance, heralded by a pillar of crimson. He fell to all fours, gasping once. Just like that, beast emerged, hideous white eyes narrowed upon the hounds. A tooth-filled maw curled in a sneer, steam parting from its jaws. And for once, those ghastly abominations were given pause. It would spell their doom. Naruto bellowed anew, not the cry of a man, but the roar of a monster. Light came with it. The sheer shockwave of his scream struck them like a thunderclap. The hound and several of its brothers dissolved like so much morning mist. He didn't give them time to regenerate. A clawed hand swept forth, sending a searing wave of light into their remains. Two would-be hounds finally fell in such a way, shriveling with a shriek. Their rest had only just begun to reform when dust rounds peppered off his cloak, raising welts against his skin. Naruto rounded on the source with a hiss and found more shadow in the night. Enemies. A bleak voice hissed in his head. Death wish. Kill them all. He's just one man. One of them braid. Open fire. More of the masked men had come. More Grimm with him. His mind stirred from its stupor, if only for a moment. What manner of idiots worked with Grimm? Didn't matter. Rip. Tear. His thoughts slipped further away. Enemies. Targets. Prey. Shots peppered off his crimson shroud. It availed them not. One of the hounds landed on his back. He casually reached up with a chakra-clad hand, tore it in half, then grasped its remains until they boiled away. The beast's screams meant nothing to him now. He fought. He snarled. He slew. On and on he raged, heedless of their dwindling numbers. Those that fled he ran down. Those who stood their ground were cut apart by cruel claws. He didn't stop. The hound were nowhere to be found in the grand melee, now having retreated or chosen to withdraw, but the soldiers yet remained. And so he fought. Don't move, you freak. A particularly pluck and foolish. Faunus accomplished what his brothers and sisters could not. Mad with fear closed the distance, raised his weapon and unloaded in Naruto's face. His head snapped to the side, jaw parting. Dust rounds parted as he swallowed each round whole. He didn't budge, not until the man's magazine clicked empty. A wiser man would have finished the job. Numbed by terror, this one did not. He stood there in mute horror, still squeezing the trigger, to no avail. Naruto reared back, regarding him as one might an annoying gnat. Come on, then do it. The faunus rasped. I die for the cause. HRRR. The beast and spat all those rounds back in the man's face. His upper torso vanished in a torrent of napalm to be, leaving his legs to tumble to the forest floor. He snatched them up and used them to bludgeon another to death, followed by a third, a fourth, now a fifth. Something slammed into his back, causing him to stumble. Whatever it was, it didn't pierce his cloak completely, nothing could, but the pain made him turn all the same. I'm sorry, did that hurt? Clutching a crude spear, the last of the surviving hounds rasped at him. He glimpsed a ruined face within its ghastly mask. It looks like it did. Viscous black tar crept up his limbs, trying to engulf him, absorb him, swallowed him whole. Wide, round white eyes narrowed to thin slits as the Jinchuriki sneered. Four scarlet tails reached around Salem's abomination and perforated its hide, slashing the hound apart as one might a panada. A fifth flicked out, carving that hideous visage in twine with segmented bone. Nothing was spared. An armless, legless, faceless thing struck the ground. It was still twitching, trying to heal, when a clawed paw stomped down on it. His hands reached down, cupping the grotesque creature's head and hand. Sorry, the fox parroted back at him, turning its own words against it. Does it hurt? Looks like it does. A vicious twist broke the hound's neck and then some, its severed spinal whistled away into the branches. It was too much for the survivors. His comrades ran away screaming. It would have been so easy to give chase, to hunt them down. He didn't. Fueled by carnal anger, Naruto planted his paws and opened his jaws. His mouth parted. Light swelled within. A tailed beast bomb was born. Rip and tear. They've retreated to the Emerald Forest. Retreat. Ospen didn't look away from the window. No, there will be no retreat for them, James. Only death. Let them be. But the intel we could gain. Heaven and earth alike shook, rattling the tower to its very foundations. Is not worth the lives we will lose if we send our people down into that hell. He will not relent until his wrath is spent. The immortal raised his gaze, looking even more haggard than Ironwood felt. Tempt not the anger of a man with a heart of stone, for in your folly you just might find. The screams of a beast echoed in the distance. A column of fire snarled into the clouds. ... He has nothing left to lose. No, wait. Mercy. I'll talk. I surrender Gek. Whatever the man might have said died in a gurgle as a clawed hand burst out his back. Naruto cast him down and whirled, seeking another victim. None came. It's all right. Never mind. He'd found one behind him, wrapped in white. He whirled, catching sight of a girl in HR's strange garment. She was saying something, but words meant nothing to him now. More noise, more sounds, enemies. All of them enemies. This isn't you. Her voice peaked with distress. Stop. He snarled at her, said snarl deepened when she stabbed a hand into her pouch and withdrew ... What was that? You made me this charm, remember. She waved a strange paper effigy before him, etched with black ink in case you ever lost control. Like you have now. You did good. She dared another step. They're safe. It's time to come back now. When he stepped forward, she raised it like a shield. Calm down. It's okay now. You're okay. The beast lunged and swept a claw at her. She winced and shattered like glass, leaving him to stumble through. Trickery. Deceit. It raged, lunging again, only to strike another illusion. Over here. There. The real one. She rolled aside, evading him, and did something with that odd item in her hand. The charm seal flitted out and raked across his ribs, peeling bits of his cloak with its passing. His shroud tried to creep back into the space left behind by it, but something resisted. Prevented. He knew the reason. Pain. It burned through his exposed skin and he rounded on her with a hiss, glaring pale daggers at her. Only then did he see the little girl beside her. The beast locked up. Something in him stilled, unwilling to step forth, unable to rip and tear. She saw him, too. Tiny lips moved. Soundless, unable to speak, never to make noise, but at this range he could read them all the same. Daddy. Naruto froze. Cracks etched in the cloak. What was he doing? He'd sworn never to hurt her. That promise held, even now. He hesitated, and in that moment, she struck. The woman in white slammed the seal into his chest. He snarled at her, but it was too late. Chakra bled into it, staining the paper a ghastly red as it siphoned off his power. He raged at it, to no avail. His arms had gone heavy, his legs like twin blocks of lead, weighing him down, leaving him weak and sluggish. With each passing moment he lost more of his strength. He pawed at the woman, to no avail. She didn't budge. Come back, Naruto. Her forehead embraced his, uncaring of the burning shroud that threatened to scorch her skin. Come back to me. To us. We're waiting for you. A thought broke through the madness that enveloped him as the charm crumbled to dust, its task done. And he saw her. She was alive, battered and BLD, moving with a limp, but still alive. His anger fizzled out and the last of the cloak with it. He slumped forward. Yup. She embraced his forehead. Welcome back. Neo darted forward, all but slamming into his lap. I'm sorry. He rasped. Didn't mean to lose control. Don't be. Summer stroked his face. You kept them safe. By the sage. He remembered all of it. Every bit. In the girls. A few cuts and bruises. She admitted after a moment's pause. Kuro and Raven made it in time. Arslan has a nasty bump on her head, but she'll live. Weiss took a few burns. Neo's mismatching eyes blinked up at them as she clung to them both. Perfectly fine, as you can see. Summer finished with a chortle. Dread dawned in his wake. What about Winter? Summer's expression proved telling. Naruto exhaled softly. Take me to her. Weiss wept. She bent double and bawled as she hadn't since. She was 3. Such behavior wasn't befitting of a Schnee. Mother would have sighed, and father surely would have taken her to task ... when they were alive. But they weren't now, were they? They were gone. Cold and dead and in the ground. Just thinking of it made her wail even louder. There was no one left to rebuke her now. No one to chide her for such uncouth behavior. Nor would Winter. She was the last Schnee. The last of her line. Why? She sobbed into their chest. Why'd you leave me alone? Winter's still body held no answers for her. This time, there was no miracle, no last-minute intervention to save her. Her lifeless form didn't budge. Somehow that made it worse. Uncle Kuro and Aunt Raven had dug her out of the rubble, but by then it was too late. If shock of the blast hadn't killed Winter, then the BLD loss certainly had. She'd lost an eye and an arm to the explosion besides, her still form now riddled with burn. A crude tourniquet bound her left arm, soaked through, all for naught. She'd perished without ever opening her eyes. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. They'd come so far together. Weiss, through her haze of grief, she was distantly aware of Arslan sitting nearby. She saw the look in her eyes. The pity. She hated it. Hated them. All of them. Don't. She recoiled. Don't you touch me. What do you know of loss? This is all your fault. Arslan let her go with a pained noise, looking like she'd been slapped. Weiss ignored her and turned back to Winter's still form. She couldn't be dead. She just couldn't. Trembling palms slammed into Winter's chest. She'd seen someone do this once. This would work, right? It had to work. Enough. Raven's arm was on her shoulder. She's gone. Tears won't bring her back. Weiss batted her hand aside. Shut up. Branwen let her go. Have it your own way, then. Winter, please. I need you. Don't leave me. Pain blazed in her chest as she continued to push down on her sister's chest. It felt like her heart was breaking in two. Her soul burned, even as her eyes bled flame. She didn't care. Didn't stop. Even as her fingers went numb and her arms began to ache. She ... she would be fine. She just had to keep her heart beating. Sister ... you're hurting me. Raven swore somewhere behind her. Blazing blue eyes flew open. Winter, a raspy groan greeted her. Why are you so blurry? You were dead. Her cough was weak, barely a whisper. Apparently I got better. When you stopped breathing, she gasped, remembering her wounds. Your eye, your arm. Fretting only made it worse and filled her with self-loathing. I'm sorry. To an outside observer, Winter didn't appear to panic. She observed her injuries with a detached air, still in shock. Her good eye glanced at the ruined stump of her left limb, ending just below the elbow, and her breath hitched. Then she wrestled it under control. A small price to pay. I can always get a prosthetic. She was being brave for her. Why, this was all her fault. If she didn't have this power, I have so much to tell you. I know. Her sister held up her good arm to forestall an explanation. I heard everything while I slept. I saw them, Weiss. Winter's tone told her of whom she spoke, even without the words. Mother, father, they were at peace. They told me to live. She pulled her into a one-armed embrace. Then you dragged me back. Weiss blinked. Me. Only then did she truly notice what had taken place. Her sister's good eye was glowing. More than that, a faint light seemed to pulse from the burns covering her left eye. Realization broke like the dawn a moment later. Had she given her sister the power, somehow? No, she still felt it within her. Lesser perhaps, but still present nonetheless. And yet the knowledge still burned. Now they'd hunt Winter, too. An ugly knot of anger coiled in her chest. I hate them. Why won't they leave us alone? Because we have something they want. Winter pulled her close with her good arm. It's all right. We'll show them what happens when they mess with a Schnee. Her arm tightened around her, tucking her head close. She heard the ice in her words, colder than any blizzard. We will show them all. In the next instant, Weiss heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Naruto slammed through the clearing, Summer half a beat behind, Neo riding on her shoulders. Weiss immediately noted the former's burns and the ragged tears in his clothes. The latter took one look at the scene before them, the ruined houses, everyone's injuries, and balked. Each were equally surprised to see Winter sitting upright. She pivoted to regard them, eyes widening in recognition. You. Well, Summer offered a weak laugh of her own. All's well that ends well. For crying out loud, Naruto sniffed once. Frowned. You split the power with her, didn't you? Weiss winced. Had she? Maybe it was an act of instinct on her part, the desperate longing to save her sister made manifest by her power. She couldn't be sure, and she certainly didn't know how to do it again. Even now a part of her soul ached as if she'd hacked away at it. Winter must have known it too, because she put on a brave face and managed an even weaker salute. Winter Schnee at your service, sir. Her elder sister didn't have the strength to stand at the moment, much less fight, but the resolve was there all the same. For the service you have done me and my sister, my life is yours. How can I help? Someone snickered. It took Weiss a full 3 seconds to realize it wasn't Miss Summer, Neo, or even Arslan. It was Naruto. Weiss balked at him. The man with the heart of stone, who scarcely so much as smiled in her presence for days now, was actually laughing. He clamped a hand over his mouth, to no avail. His shoulders convulsed with barely restrained mirth, and that was it. He threw his head back and guffawed openly at the shattered moon. Arslan winced. Oh, Dad. You all right there? Neo shook her head and offered a soundless shrug of her own. Great. Summer puffed out her cheeks in mild indignation. Now look at what you've done. You broke him. Finally, the blonde palmed his face and shook his head. Not this time, fate. Weiss blinked. I'm sorry. It's nothing. He wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and chortled one last time. Just a thought. Damp blue eyes turned to regard the ruin of Summer's cottage. I think a move is in order. That look became a wince now when the roof caved in. All right, maybe more than a move. How do you girls feel about staying in Beacon for a bit? Neo perked up. Arslan squeaked. For real? Yes, for real. Where's Raven? We need a portal. Distantly, she heard Branwen tut at her. I'm here. Diamond slave driver. Weiss flopped down with a sigh, the last of her stamina bleeding away. Winter patted her back, and she took solace in it. She hated their enemies. That much was certain. But she didn't hate this. Certainly not. Oh gods. She'd have to apologize to Arslan and the others. But later. Once she was rested. This was her family now. Her heart belonged to them. For better or worse. Wincing a little, she climbed to her feet and dusted herself down. Will there be baths? We're absolutely filthy. Beacon. Naruto would give credit where it was due. Arslan really could run when she wanted to. The moment their airship set down, she was off like a shot, leaping across the tarmac, eyes ablaze. Literally, Naruto could see them glowing with fresh fire from here. He could have echoed Summer's shout in that instant, called for the wild child to slow down. He chose not to, if only because he understood how she felt. Poor girl had been cooped up too long after their ordeal with the hounds. They all had. Small wonder she wanted to stretch her legs. Arslan Alton, you slow down this instant, young lady. Their girl did no such thing, of course. She was a child, and children loved to run whenever they got the chance. You'll never take me alive. Tamed the accompanying cackle. Rebellion. Honestly, Weiss huffed as they traipsed after the energetic girl. I don't see the appeal of hay. Let go of my arm. She yelped as her fellow maiden doubled back, caught her by wrist, and hauled her toward the distant spires of Ospen's school. The stoic Winter moved to follow them, then paused. Naruto didn't miss the way she glanced back at them, the way her lone eye sought his and Summer's, almost as if asking for permission. Made him feel as responsible for her as he did those girls. Someone so young shouldn't suffer scars like that. He wished he could give her back her eye and arm. But he couldn't now, could he? He was only good for killing. His throat closed, and for once, words failed him. Instead he waved her on. Sure enough, she followed the girls at a sedate pace. And there they go. Summer cracked a rare, rueful smile. Don't you want to join them, Neo? Situated between them, the little shook her head soundlessly and clung to both their hands. Her intents were clear. She wasn't going anywhere. Time to face the old man, then. Naruto let Summer and Neo tug him along, gaze drifting for the foggy spires above. The tall towers of Ospen's academy had never been more welcome than they were now. They'd be far safer here than they'd been back at the cottage. Oz might be a paranoid old BSTRD, but they still shared a common enemy, no more than ever. Salem would be a fool to strike here. And even if she did, they had the forces to rebuff her. She couldn't be allowed to have the maidens, now more than ever. Maidens meant relics. Put all four of them together and he'd rather not take his chances with a pair of pricks like that. He'd never met the brother gods. After all Ospen had told him, he had no longing to. They needed stay far, far, far from Remnant. And if they came here, he would kill them too. He was good at killing. That part of him, at least, hadn't atrophied after all this time. If only he could find a way to kill Salem herself. This would all be so much easier. His lips pursed at the thought. No, don't think about that. He had a purpose here, to protect these little lights, these small seasons, until they could stand on their own. That would be what, maybe 10 more years of training, if not more. Irrelevant. He dismissed it not a moment later. Matter how long it took. He had to be good for that much at least. Self-sacrificing is always when will you learn? He grit his teeth and ignored the fox. But there was Ospen now. He could see the old wizard awaiting them in the plaza, hands braced upon his cane. Not alone at that, he'd brought Raven and Kuro along, too. And there was little Yang playing with Arslan and the Schnees sisters while a bemused Tai looked on with one watchful eye. No surprise there. Yang had been starved for attention just as much as his girls these past few days. Mama Raven was a protective raven, he'd found. Nobody was going to harm her little chick. Not on her watch. Summer nudged him with his elbow, tugging him back to reality. He followed her gaze and found Neo looking longingly toward the other girls. Go on. He gave her a nudge. Have fun. Mismatching eyes snapped to him. She tilted her head. Yes, I'm sure. A rusty laugh escaped him. You've earned it. Her eyes burned with flame as she dove in to hug him and Summer both. Ospen stepped to him. You look awful. He almost laughed. Almost. You should see the other guy. A beat of silence passed between them. And then, it's good to see you safe, my friend. He held out a hand waiting for him. Rest assured, you and yours will be protected here. Naruto stepped in and clasped it, knowing they really were. With classes out for the year and a generous contingent of soldiers courtesy of Ironwood, Beacon was a veritable fortress. They had the run of the campus until all Oz could move them to safer location in the interim. Plenty of time to get the kids trained up to a reasonable degree before they moved them to a secure location. This is the first time we've had 3 maidens in generations. He watched the trio race about with a bemused smile, humming a little as Team STRQ fussed over them. I never thought I'd see the day. He didn't much like his tone just then. Made him worry, it did. You want to separate them. After all the effort you went through to gather them. Perish the thought. A comfortable silence stretched between the two immortals once more. Naruto counted to 9. And then, you have something for me, don't you? Yes. Sure enough, Ospen turned to face him, looking more than a little chagrined. I hate to ask this of you so soon after what happened, but my spies have found something. An irritable flash of indignation seared through Naruto's heart. As ever, he stomped down on it until it died with a whimper. It's fine. It isn't. Summer materialized at his side to grip his arm and reel him back. He's running on fumes, Oz. Let him rest. Would that I could, but the news I've received cannot be ignored. We've word of a maiden in menagerie. Silver eyes held his for a long moment. Narrowed. Someone needs to go with him. Naruto squinted her way. They do. Yes. She gave him a furious shake until he nodded. No going alone on this one, Buster. Not after what happened last time. I'd be more than happy to lend my services, Ospen interjected, but you know what will happen. They did. If he took to the field, Salem would do the same. It was something of an unspoken agreement between their sides, one he wasn't sure would last much longer. She was already on the losing side, and down a minion at that. With only one maiden left to be found who knew what she might do. It can't be Raven, Summer interjected. We need her here for a portal. I'll go. Naruto growled at her. You can't. What? Why the hell not? You know why. He fixed her with a baleful stare, thinking the words, but not speaking them. She read his intention a moment later and winced. Silly girl. Of course she'd forget about her PRGNNCY. He hadn't. It was early to be sure, but he couldn't bear the thought of her coming to harm. Nothing could threaten Ruby's BRTH. He wouldn't allow it. I'll go. All eyes turned to Kuro and found the huntsman's hand raised high. He almost seemed surprised to have said it himself. Ospen quirked a pale brow. Are you certain? This will not be an easy task. You may well be wailing into a war zone. You see any other huntsman around? He lowered his arm and clamped a hand to the flask at his belt. Raven's gotta stay for obvious reasons. Some has to keep an eye on the girls, just in case they burn Beacon down. Nicholas ain't answering his scroll, and Meg's on vacation. Young would pitch a fit if Tai left ... and frankly I don't want anyone mistaking her for a maiden. Raven touched a hand to Omen's hilt. They will die if they try. Hey, he grinned. You really can be a half-decent mom ... when you're not a total beach about it. Why you? So, he said amidst her sputter of rage, we good. This way we have 2 portals in case SHT goes sideways. What could possibly go wrong? Raven kicked him the arse. Summer smacked her forehead. Naruto blew out a sigh. He'd long since closed his heart off to all but a precious few, but even so, those words drew a twitch. Thanks for jinxing it. Hey, my semblance ain't that bad. The blonde brow rose. Puh. He flung up his arms. What do you care? You're practically immortal. In another life Naruto might have agreed with him. As a boy he genuinely had thought himself invincible, untouchable, until, quite suddenly, he wasn't. Until the knife slammed into his back. Until he'd broken his trust in others and himself alive. Now, he simply shook his head. Not immortal, just strong to kill. Eternal youth wasn't a blessing. It was a curse more insidious than Salem herself. On that much, we can agree. Naruto craned his neck. He knew that voice. James, had he come with the last detachment of troops? Now there was a man who understood what it meant to fight the good fight. When you had an enemy in your sight, there was only one course of action to be had. One shot, one kill, one swing of the axe. Simple and clean. Less emotional baggage that way. Raven clucked like her namesake. 3 men to find 1 girl. Isn't that a bit overkill? I prefer to call it a tactical response. He pivoted to face them. I may not be able to join in menagerie without starting a war, but I can give you my fastest unmarked craft. Would that suffice? Ospen nodded. That would be sufficient, yes. Hero rolled his eyes and raised his flask. Whatever you say, Irondick. Steely eyes cut his way. Branwen, if you were one of my men, I'd have you shot. A bark of laughter chased down the whiskey. If I were one of your boys, I'd shoot myself. Yong's hand speared into the air, cutting off the man's thunderous retort. Can I come? Raven bobbed her head. Absolutely ... not. Boom. And that goes double for you girls. Summer cut in, seeing Weiss and Neo raising a hand. Arslan huffed and kicked at the dirt. See, Mom. Yang remained insatiable. They want to go, too. That's enough out of you, fiery child of mine. Raven, much to Naruto's relief, wasn't having it. You can run missions when you're strong enough to beat me, and not a day sooner. Tai chortled softly. Wouldn't she still need a hunter's license? Irrelevant. Her strength is what matters. Whatever you say, love. Yang turned a pouty look Naruto's way. He knew it well, and what she wanted from him. I'll bring you back some souvenirs. She beamed a gap-toothed grin at him. She'd lost another one of her baby teeth. Best uncle of all. Hero hissed. Boy, be safe. Summer enfolded him in a tight embrace before they could come back to blows. Come back to me. She touched a hand to her stomach. To us. The words caught up to her a second later. Raven's brow diameter shot up into her hairline. Us. All eyes cut to Summer, her face slowly suffusing a deep crimson. Hero found his voice first, the words emerging as a startled rasp. You got a bun in the oven. Summer whined. You weren't meant to hear that. Naruto was wise enough to step back. Just as well too, because everyone went mad. The kids absolutely swarmed Summer. This is wonderful news. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Ospen this happy. I never thought I'd see the day. The man whirled away, already pacing, cane taping restlessly against the stones. Any child with silver eyes is a boon to be sure, but one possessing Naruto's strength and stamina, his regeneration. Raven clicked her tongue in mild admonishment. You're doing it again, old man. Stop focusing on the future. Yes, He coughed into a fist and looked away. Forgive me, I'm just so terribly excited. Naruto blew out a sigh. I really did get involved with a bunch of oddballs this time. Another fracture etched itself into his heart of stone, joining a third, a fourth, followed by a fifth. Summer materialized at his elbow. You're smiling again. He touched a hand to his face. So it would seem. Blake looked left. Blake looked to the right. Blake didn't see a single soul in sight. She didn't like practicing where Mom and Dad could see her. They were afraid of this power, terrified really after her last demonstration. They loved her, but they feared the gift she'd been given. She didn't blame them. It was only natural to fear that which you did not understand. Humans and Faunus were no different in that regard. It made her want to understand it. All right, let's see if I can do that trick again. Slowly, she raised a hand. Her maiden power responded in a strange way. The shadows stirred at her feet, responding to her will, rising like a dozen grasping hands. Her eyes burning with golden flames, the little girl made a fist. The dark tethers didn't so much skewer the wall as they did crush it. She grinned, a rare flicker of hope breaking through her melancholy. Mate, I'll say. A new voice cooed behind her. Blake whirled and caught sight of a stinger. Her eyes widened. A burlap sack slammed down over her head. How sad. Neo couldn't move. You've lost something most important, haven't you? She wanted to move. She knew she needed to. And now you have nothing left. So why couldn't she move? Why was she just sitting here in this chair as death came for her? Her breath hitched in her chest, rising in terrified little gasps as a dark shadow fell over her. This was a dream. It had to be. Must be. She didn't recognize this place. She didn't want to be here. She wanted to go home. Back to her papa, mama, back to her sisters. But she couldn't. Because you see, Neo was staring at a cat. Not just any cat, but a terrible, awful white and black thing that laughed and talked down at her worse than her old parents ever had, like she was nothing. An awful kitty that grew and grew and grew until he was bigger than her, big enough to pry open her mouth with its paws and then. How delightful, it purred, teeth gone sharp, eyes blazing black. You weren't the one I was looking for, but you'll suffice. A paw pressed against her lips, seeking purchase. An empty host perfect for me to fill. And a maiden at that. My, don't mind if I do. A crimson hand closed around the back of his head and yanked the foul feline into the air. It yowled furiously. Just like that, the spell was broken. Neo lurched forward onto her hands and knees, gasping for air. You know, a familiar voice drawled, I never liked dreams. They always give me a headache. Neo felt a boot nudge her side, ever so gently. Up you go, Neo. Her head snapped up. She knew that voice. Sure enough, it was both Naruto ... and yet not Naruto. He looked younger, less rugged, the shadows gone from his eyes, hair shorter, beard nowhere to be seen. His rugged huntsman attire and weapon were nowhere to be seen. In their place he wore some kind of ghastly orange on black jumpsuit, the kind you'd find at some backwater bargain bin sale. Papa, she touched a hand to her throat, alarmed at the voice that came through. How? She had a voice here. She'd never had a voice, not once in her life. What was this place? This is a dream. Her mentor smiled down at her. You can do whatever you want here. Be whatever you want to be. He looked down at himself and grunted in mild annoyance. Although it seems some things just don't change for me. The cat clawed at his hand. Right, almost forgot about you. His brow furrowed. Scram. He threw the crazed creature away. It struck the floor with a sibilant snarl. You fool. Its back arched at him as it hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? How long it took me to get here? She was mine. And how she's not. Papa shimmered, and for a moment he was the same rugged hunter that found her shivering in the cellar. Leave now and I'll let you live. I think not. In a blink, its fury was replaced by a decidedly caddish expression, one of smug glee. You're looking rather hollow yourself. I'll take your body instead. Naruto tilted his head. Only then did Neo truly see her foster father's eyes. They were red, red as BLD, his eyes bearing the black slits of some sort of monstrous beast. The cat seemed to shrink beneath his gaze. Papa only loomed larger. Was it just her imagination, or did his shadow look bigger, too? Almost like it had 9 tails. When he laughed, it was impossibly deep. And she heard the beast within. You can try. The cat lunged at him with a yowl ... on to bounce off his chest. What is your heart made of? It struck the floor and curled inward on itself with a pained cry. Stone. Yes. He seized it by the scruff of its neck. But stone can be many things. Cold, yes, but also strong. Unyielding. Stones crushes their enemies. Bury them. Smother them ... just like. A clawed hand closed around the cat's throat. I'm about. It warbled out a gasp. ... to smother your very existence. No, wait. The beast thrashed in his grasp. I don't want to die. Then you should have left my daughter alone. Watch closely now, Neo. Papa turned to wane a smile on her. This is what we do to our enemies. Neo nodded once. After what that mean kitty nearly did to her, she wouldn't look away for the world. Dreams are a funny thing, aren't they? He prattled as she looked on, enraptured. Neo's real, here. As am I, and so are you. Scarlet cracks crept up the cat's skin as he flooded it with red light from within. So why don't you do me a favor? He raised his voice as the curious cat began to wail in utter agony. Keep your filthy curious paws off my daughter ... and just die. The cat vanished in a blaze of scarlet flame, its screams echoing in the void. And that's that. Papa dusted his hands off and turned to face her. You good, kiddo? If she could only speak in her dreams ... well, that was sad, but she could speak here. Now, while she had a chance. Papa saw the look in her eyes and scowled. No, don't you spider monkey me, young lady. Too little, too late. Neo launched herself up off the floor at him with all her might. The moment she made contact, she wrapped both arms around Naruto's neck. He went still as stone. Still she clung on for dear life, dangling from him. A full 3 seconds passed before he finally relented with a sigh and hugged her back. A tired sigh rose to greet her ears. Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. Neo scowled and clung tighter. He'd best not. Thank you. She babbled into his ear, nuzzling her cheek against his now when he tried to pull away. For finding me that day. For letting me stay. For Mama Summer. For my sisters. For Ruby when she's born. For all of it. Thank you. Best papa ever. Love you. ... You're welcome. He leaned back and pressed a finger against her forehead. All right, that's enough hugs for one night. Wake up, kiddo. Neo bolted awake, heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't scream. Not by any choice of hers, mind you. She absolutely wanted to. She simply lacked the voice for it, not the lung capacity. Right now she only wanted one thing. Stubborn papa. Little face writ in a thunderous scowl, she flung herself out of bed, snatched up her teddy and ran for her bedroom door. From there she wrenched it open, paused for a moment to orient herself in the dim hall, found her target, and booked it. She would not be denied. Shadows seemed to stretch in the gloom as she marched to her destination. They usually terrified her, now she ignored them. Being afraid of the dark seemed so silly after what she'd just seen. What kind of dream was that? No, not a dream. Nightmare more like. At least it had been until the end. Until her papa arrived. He was always there for her, and she knew he was headed to Menagerie tomorrow to find and protect another young maiden. Just like her, he was always giving without ever thinking of receiving. Now she was going to be there for him when it mattered most. And if that meant stealing a march on Arslan and the Schnees sisters while they were sleeping. Well, two birds with one stone. Her siblings could sulk come morning. He was her papa first. She found his bedroom and knocked twice. Twice again when no one replied. 5 times, now. A tired groan answered. Sounded like Mama. Come in. Neo needed no further prodding. She scurried inside. Mama Summer was scrubbing at her eyes as she sat up, one hand over her stomach. Neo fought down a silent smile at the sight. A little sister. Just thinking of her made her giddy. She'd be the best big sister to her. The bestest ever. Even if Ruby wasn't related to her by BLD, that didn't matter. No one would ever live the hellish childhood Trivia had suffered before running away. Before meeting her real papa. Papa looked awake right now. Further proof that her dream was real. Well, he patted the space between him and Summer. What are you waiting for? Come on up. Neo didn't need to be told twice. She jumped on them. Neo didn't care if he wasn't her real papa. He was real in all the ways that mattered. Still him. Still really real. Still her one and only. Dad. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like. And subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.